2019. The opinions expressed by the participants in the following program do not necessarily represent that of this station or its management.
Or anybody else.
From the John DeVita Recording Studio, located in an undisclosed and clandestine location on the great northwest side of our fair city of Chicago, we once again are pleased to be presenting yet another edition of our monthly roundtable panel discussion show, Meet the Chicago Historian. Now here's the guy who started it all, John DeVita.
Well, thank you very much, Rich, from the John DeVita Broadcast Center. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another broadcast of Meet the Chicago Historians on the Windy City Hometown Entertainment Network on Monday, March the 18th, the year 2019. Today, the panel will be talking about presidents, mayors, and, of course, good old St. Patrick's. So sit back and enjoy Meet the Chicago Historians. And now to start today's broadcast, there's our announcer, Mr. Richard Lang.
And now here's our panel moderator, John S. Kachelko.
Well,
John?
Thank you very much, Rich. It's good to be with you today. We're broadcasting on March the 18th. We're in the day that stands between two great saints. St. Patrick's Day was yesterday, the bishop and patron saint of Ireland, and tomorrow is the feast of St. Joseph, foster father of Jesus Christ and the patron of workers, carpenters. So we're very glad to be here today. This is our March edition of Meet the Chicago Historians, and if you've been looking for us, we've been away for a couple of months. The weather was quite inclement, particularly on the dates that our broadcasting was scheduled. We were in the midst of blizzards and high winds and deep snow and assorted other results of global warming during these dismal months of January and February. So you may remember we had great weather around Christmas and New Year's and up through about the first week and a half of January, and then the bottom fell out, and we've had several months of cold, dismal, depressing weather, and the result was the cancellation of two of our taping sessions for January and February. But we're here now in March, and we're glad to be with you from the John DeVita Broadcasting Center. Don't look for us. You'll run afoul of the checkpoints and the guards and the barbed wire and so forth, so don't even try looking for us, folks. We're in a heavily fortified underground command center here, and it would just be too much of a hassle for you to try to get down here. But I'd like to give our panelists an opportunity to introduce myself, and I'll begin with the gentleman who was our announcer. We could get a formal introduction of our great and mellifluously toned announcer.
Thank you, John.
Now, I'm your announcer, Rich Lang. I've got a background in American and European history at the college level, teaching survey courses, recent history. I've become more and more of a fan of Chicago neighborhood history, thanks to our beloved gentleman who passed away a little over a year ago, my mentor, Ken Little. And I'm also now involved in a group that does old-time radio shows, which is a great nostalgia thing. I like to say I live more and more in the past. You just read the daily paper, headlines are so bad, go to the past.
There's much to commend it.
This is true. This is true, especially if you have a historical point of view. And would the next panelist like to give an introduction?
Yes, John. Okay. Sure. I tell you what, the only thing that is really worth reading anymore in the paper is the comic section. Bill Kugelman here, excuse me, ex-chief in the Chicago Fire Department, 46 years of that, and also with the Illinois Bureau of Racetrack Police and the Fire Museum of Greater Chicago, and I was president of the union for a while too. I want to say this about what Rich just gave up. is about Ken Little is yes, he's very, very, very well missed.
Well remembered.
Oh boy, oh boy. You know, anytime you come into a problem and you say, well, Ken would know that. But anyway, I've been in here in John's studio in this clandestine room for quite some time with Cop Talk and with now with Chicago Historians, and it's a pleasure. We sure have had some lousy weather, but not as lousy as California and Florida and Washington and what's going on now. It's terrible when you think of these people that worked all their lives and now we're going to go and move to a nice place to live and relax, and all of a sudden here comes the floods or the fire or whatever. We're pretty damn lucky here in the Midwest. You know, say what you want. Chicago is my hometown.
Here, here. Yeah.
You're here.
Yeah, the weather was bad enough to cancel our radio shows, but you're right. I mean, by comparison to what's happening around the country and in other parts of the world, we're very fortunate.
Yeah.
You know, well, they've got this problem now in Nebraska. There's floods in Nebraska, and they've had
Terrible out there.
blizzards in Colorado, so it's really, really bad.
What strikes me around Chicago this winter, not terribly heavy in snow, not terribly cold overall, but the winds.
Yeah.
The winds have been very strong in recent weeks.
The Windy City, Rich.
Yeah, and I've gotten some leg issues in the last year, and thank God I've had a cane with me. Without that cane, I would have been on the street, flat on my back a couple of times.
You know, gentlemen, when Bill was saying about Meet the Chicago Historians, it's about 16 years that we've been doing the Meet the Chicago Historians from the John DeVita Broadcast Center. For quite a few years, we were live on WJJG, AM 1530, and then when Joe Gentile passed away and things changed.
Most dramatically.
Yeah, we just kept on the program, but we were on another radio station, the Ridgewood High School radio station, WRHS, which is now has been. So Meet the Chicago Historians has been around the clock a little bit, and we started right here in the control room. It was Bill Kulgerman, Ken Little, Vic Rini, and Vic Costino. They were the four people that started right here in this little room right here. We had the table set up and we did that, and then little by little we Jack Ryan got involved, and he brought in Jack Ryan and Ken Little brought in Rich, and then John, you came in, and now Tom, and now of course our other gentleman that's not with us today because he's doing some government work is Dennis. So we've had quite a few, but basically speaking, we've been on broadcasting for about the past 16 years. It was in 2002. In fact, it was March the 1st of 2002 when I got involved with radio station WJJG. And I was station manager and chief engineer for 10.5 years until my pal Joe passed away. And then John Chicana picked up the broadcast, and we went on the internet, and then Kevin Zeflik picked up the station, program, and put it on WRHS. And the only thing that's left now to this day, as far as broadcasting and on the air is concerned, is the Windy City Hometown Entertainment Network.
And it's a shame, folks. It's too bad you can't come down here because we don't admit anyone, but you can see the huge museum that we have commemorating our 16 years. There are great exhibits commemorating all the people we've just talked about, and all these. It's really a fabulous place. It's a shame we can't invite you in, but take my word for it. It's really a magnificent tribute to the Meet the Chicago Historians' legacy of the past 16 years. Sure. We have one more member of our panel who has not had an opportunity to identify himself yet, so let me ask him to go right ahead.
Tom McKenna, retired Chicago police officer, 34 years. the last 22 as an investigator with the Major Accident Investigation Section, and a lifelong friend of our regular moderator, Jack Red Ryan, who unfortunately is under the weather. John had a mild stroke and a fall, and he is in rehab at the moment. Hopefully, he'll be back with us shortly. I spoke with him. He's in very good spirits. So you can keep him in your prayers, and hopefully he'll be back joining the group shortly.
That's right, and we do. If you're able to hear our broadcast, Jack, we miss you, and we wish you all the best, a speedy recovery. And Jack has been the mainstay of this show for a number of years prior to my joining it, for sure, and has a great record with the Chicago Police Department and many anecdotes. He has a man of a vast fund of knowledge about motion pictures and television, and we miss him, and hope he'll be back with us very shortly.
Always a great sense of humor, too.
Right.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes, absolutely. So, Jack, we wish you all the best. Good luck, and rejoin us as ASAP, as they say today. Well, we had planned last month to talk about a topic called mayors and presidents. We were in the midst of the mayoral race in the great, in quotation marks, the great city of Chicago, and of course that has since taken place. And President's Day, and I don't like that term because it should be Washington's birthday. I don't like the fact that we don't specifically honor George Washington anymore. And in fact, I think the legislation, when they changed the date, simply changed the date. It was still supposed to be called Washington's birthday. But someone got the bright idea of amalgamating it as President's Day. And I don't think anyone really knows what that means. Who are we honoring? Right. But it was Washington's birthday in the month of February, and Abraham Lincoln's birthday. And, by the way, another great president, Ronald Reagan, were all born in the month of February. So there is a reason for honoring more than one. But we're also honoring today, and we're going to continue with that mayors and presidents. We've got a couple hours and more to talk today, and we'll be talking about mayors past and maybe even present of the city of Chicago, and presidents of the United States. But yesterday was St. Patrick's Day, and I see my colleague. I'm a little bit hamstrung. It's hard for me to say that he's to my right because I always like to insist that no one is to the right of me.
Oh no, you're right.
But geographically, directionally speaking, he is seated to my right, and he is resplendent in an emerald green sweater, parka.
Yes.
Today, so
and when my grandkids ordered this for me and presented it to me several years ago with my name on it, I just said, you know what, kids? You should have told them to put the O in front of Kuhlman.
That would do it.
Because that would have really set people off.
That's right. That's right.
But this is what the kids got me here quite some time ago, and it goes back in the closet now for another year.
So that's strictly a St. Patrick's Day.
Yep.
Garment. I've got a emerald green necktie. For years I've been looking for an emerald green. I finally found it last Christmas, I think it was. I found it out in Oak Brook. So I wore at Mass yesterday for St. Patrick's Day. I wore my one day of the year St. Patrick's Day emerald green necktie. And last night I watched The Quiet Man, which is what we always would do on St. Patrick's Day. My mom and dad loved that movie. We would always watch The Quiet Man with John Wayne and Maureen O'Hara and Barry Fitzgerald and Ward Bond and Victor McLaughlin, one of the great movies, the really great movies. Presents such a beautiful view of Ireland. It really is a great film, great acting, great directing, great character actors. So I did that. And I had my Irish soda bread. I love Irish soda bread.
True.
And I discovered that, it was probably about 20 years ago. It wasn't something I knew of in my childhood, but I went to a St. Patrick's Day dinner that our parish one of our parishes in town had a St. Patrick's and St. Joseph's Day dinner, and they invited all of our town officials to attend, and on the menu was this delicious bread that I had never had. I said, "What is this?" And they told me it was Irish soda bread, so I've had it every year since, and it is great.
We had ours yesterday too. At after Mass, we go down in the basement in the cafeteria, and the girls all had their own version of Irish soda bread.
Ah.
There's about
Well,
6 or 7 of them, and you could just see, wasn't me, but other people were going back and forth 6 or 7 times.
well, the traditional Irish soda bread is made without raisins. They didn't have raisins in Ireland.
Oh, is
And
that right?
Yeah.
Right.
So that's
if
an
it's a-
American
it-
edition.
I've seen it
it's-
either way
It's
with
the
or without
Americanized
raisins,
version with raisins.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what I got sitting on my counter upstairs in my kitchen. Last night, Oscar and I, we had corned beef, cabbage, potatoes, onions, and carrots. And sitting right alongside was a great big, and I still got a big piece of it yet too, of soda bread. For many years, my sister has always made a soda bread for St. Patrick's Day.
Traditional St. Patrick's Day meal. Of course,
Yep.
some of my friends say that a 7-course Irish meal is a boiled potato and a 6-pack. But the traditional includes Irish soda bread.
Well, I've got a very good friend from college who I've known for many, many years. He lives out west in DeKalb County, and he was telling me his ancestry is Irish, and his dad was from Boston. And he said that his dad said that corned beef and cabbage was not anything that they thought of as being specifically St. Patrick's Day or an Irish, but that's become the accepted
Right.
menu for St. Patrick's Day. And I said, well, it's kind of like that line in the movie The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, when the editor says, "When the legend becomes fact, print the legend."
Right,
So if everybody
exactly.
believes corned beef and cabbage is St. Patrick's Day dinner, have corned beef and cabbage.
Right, right.
We've been joined by a new addition. You see, it is possible if you're a member of the panel, you can get through the checkpoints, but it takes time.
That's right.
To show your identification, the fingerprint check. They have that eye, the iris of the eye check, and all of that. So one of our panelists obviously was delayed getting in here through all the checks, but let's give him an opportunity to introduce himself.
I'm
Folks.
Don Peter. I'm from Oak Park, Illinois, and I'm a member of the Fire Museum of Greater Chicago, and I like it. Thank you.
Very good.
Very right.
And we're just indicating that our theme for today would be mayors, presidents, and St. Patrick, and we're on the St. Patrick's Day portion
Okay.
of our gathering today. Does anybody else have any special things they do on St. Patrick's Day, or
Well,
anything we haven't talked
I play with the Shannon Rovers Irish Bagpipe Band, and we've been busy all week long. We call it St. Patrick's Day season, and we play from sun up to sunset. We split up into 5 or 6 different groups. We have enough members to do that, and we play at during the season, we play at over 200 events. Bars, parish parties, house parties, churches,
Parades.
and we are unit number 1 in the Chicago St. Patrick's Day Parade every year. We're the official band of the Chicago St. Patrick's Day Parade.
Were you in? I watched it on
Yes.
TV. Were you in the city parade?
Oh yeah.
I looked for
Unit-
it. I didn't.
unit-
I looked on the screen, but I didn't see it.
Unit number 1 every year.
And it was a big contingent too. It was a big grouping that they had in the
Yeah, yeah, right. We have over 80 members that play, and like I say, we play. It'd be easier to tell you where we don't play than where we actually do play. Very busy. Well, it's a big Chicago celebration. Boston, New York, Chicago. Strangely enough, one of the largest St. Patrick's Day parades. It's arguably the largest, depending upon who you talk to, is in Savannah, Georgia.
Yeah.
Interesting. Are bagpipes more of a Irish or a Scotch tradition?
Originally Scotch.
More Scotch originally.
right.
That's interesting. Yeah.
I imagine it was cold. It must have been cold marching on because the weather was not that.
Well, surprisingly, the kilts are warm. It's double wool. They're thicker than the average pair of pants you wear. It seems like everyone says, "Oh, you must be cold," but actually they're warm. And when you think about it, Scotland is not known for
No.
is a tropical climate. So Obviously, they were warm. Bagpipes are. It's one of those things that you either love them or you don't love them. Oscar Wilde defined a gentleman as someone that knows how to play the bagpipes but doesn't.
Very well.
What's the difference between the bagpipes that they have a bag under there and one of them they blow in?
The Irish
It's
pipes
different.
that you don't blow into, it's called Julian bagpipes. It's the same concept. You just don't put air in the bag through your mouth. You pump it in through a bellows.
Someone on the TV they were describing this, and I wasn't aware of that. They were showing the difference, how the Irish
The
bagpipes.
Julian are strictly Irish, but the traditional standard bagpipes. But there's bagpipes around the world. Believe it or not, there's Italian bagpipes. And India, everywhere that the British colonies were, they had bagpipes. In Hong Kong today, they have a huge police bagpipe band as a result of the British influence.
British Empire throughout the world. So it was one of the many things that Britain spread.
Exactly. India still have bagpipe bands in India.
Do you have to provide your own uniform, the kilts? Do you have to pay, or do they? I'm curious.
Yeah,
do they
right.
provide any of it, or do you have to pay for your own bagpipes?
It depends upon the organization. There's no standard issue, but normally you buy it yourself, and then as you play, you get reimbursed for it.
Oh, okay. Well, that makes sense. That makes sense.
But,
That's reasonable.
But it's a very expensive proposition. You can't go in and buy that uniform at at Kmart.
No, it's not off the rack.
Yeah.
Yeah,
What does a bagpipe? What would it cost to buy a
cheap,
bagpipe?
1,500. Expensive,
$1,500.
The mid-level probably 2,000.
Wow.
Expensive.
I bet people don't
5,000.
realize. I had no idea they were that expensive.
Where are they made, Tom? Are they?
Usually in Scotland.
Scotland?
Most are in Scotland. Some are made in Canada. There's a company that starts in the United States that just formed that makes them.
Oh, okay.
Do many stores sell bagpipes? Maybe in Irish neighborhoods, you can just
No.
You have to order them. You have
Yeah,
to go
right.
to a,
ordered.
They 95% are manufactured in Scotland.
In Scotland. Okay.
There's all kinds of traditions that basically, in my opinion, are nonsense. But the true Scottish bagpipes, when the wood that they're made out of has to come from some special area, and when they're drilled, in order to dry the wood, it has to be dried by the wind that blows over a certain mountain range in Scotland. Otherwise, again, nice,
Otherwise
when the legend
becomes fact.
becomes fact.
Print the legend.
You know what? If they didn't do that, what you'd see on the tag. It would be made in China.
Right. Well, I'm sure there probably is a version made in China, but traditionally they're Scotland.
Right.
Yeah, and again, it's a Chicago tradition, like bagpipes at weddings and unfortunately at funerals. Amazing Grace being played. It becomes a tradition, and major cities, big cities. It's not unusual. I mean, if you the last few days walking around in the uniform, it's not, someone that's from Chicago seeing someone wearing a kilt. It's not totally out of place. In other parts of the country, they wouldn't have the slightest idea who you were or what you were doing.
When my granddaughter Grace was born, I had a Arlington Heights copper. You probably know him. I had him at the door of the hospital as she was coming out with the baby playing Amazing Grace. He parked the squad there and then just got out and started playing it. And I tell you, people just from all over were looking, what is this? What is this?
Well, I also play with the pipes and drums of the Chicago Police Department, and unfortunately last Wednesday we played with a combined group for the McHenry County Sheriff that was killed in the line of duty, and the services were held at Woodstock High School. So police bagpipe bands have become traditional, especially in police funerals and in memorials.
That brings up another point. We talked about buying the bagpipes, but how hard is it to learn to play the bagpipes? How long does it take someone to master? It's got to be complicated to learn how to do that.
Being involved in music all my life, I play several different instruments, and people always ask that question, and I give a stock answer. I said, most musical instruments are not really that difficult to play, but they're difficult to play well. Mm-hmm. And to master a bagpipe, several years. You start out at what's called the chanter, which is, if you could visualize a set of bagpipes, that's the blowpipe, not the blowpipe, the chanter that comes down out of the bag. You blow into the bag, and then the stick that comes out is the chanter, and you just start on that. That's what you practice on. You don't buy the whole set of pipes. And then once you get that down, 6 months to a year, then you can buy the pipes and start.
Wow.
And start playing.
Do you know of any women that play the bagpipes?
Oh yeah.
Really?
Yeah, Shannon Rovers. We've got the police bagpipe band. We've got 2 or 3 female.
Oh, that's interesting.
Oh yeah.
Goes against stereotype. Yeah.
Yeah, it's there's not a lot of things that women. As a matter of fact, we're talking about things you never saw women do. And I mentioned, of course, this is several years ago. I said I never saw female pallbearers. And strangely enough, the very next wake, or the next funeral I went to, they had 6 women as pallbearers, and that's the only other time I've seen that.
For a woman, I would imagine.
No, it was kind of a strange thing.
That is interesting.
And actually those were the only women pallbearers. Of course, I've never seen a male cocktail waitress in Las Vegas either. So it goes both ways. Yeah.
That you know of.
Right. That I know of. Of course, now there is no.
Right.
There is no gender identity.
No, sure. Right. Their legs can't measure up to them.
Right. A cocktail person.
Oh, gee.
Well, that's interesting. That is very interesting. We're coming up on. We're going to be coming up on our first half hour. We're here for 2.5 hours, as you know, with Meet the Chicago Historians. We're here on the 18th day of March in the year of our Lord 2019. We're doing mayors and presidents and St. Patty's Day. Interesting discussion thus far about bagpipes and the Shannon Rovers, the celebrated marching unit. Here
another
in
interesting thing about the bagpipes, you couldn't get into up until, well, now it's not that long ago, or it is that long ago. The older you get, time seems strange, but you couldn't get in the musician union if your only instrument was a bagpipe, because it was considered an instrument of war. Originally the Scottish, especially the Highlanders, they marched into battle behind bagpipes.
Oh, sure.
And bagpipes are so familiar, and it's hard to imagine someone that have never seen or heard a bagpipe. But if you never have, and you're the enemy, and you're standing there, and all of a sudden up over the hill comes 20 or 30 bagpipers in that sound, you have absolutely no idea, and it's terrifying.
They didn't call it that, but that was psychological warfare.
Right. Yeah,
it was to instill fear in the enemy.
Yeah, exactly.
And if you remember from the movie The Longest Day, the British had them at D-Day. They had bagpipes on the Normandy beaches. There's a scene there in which the British units are getting ready to play the bagpipes. So it has. We think of it today mostly with police, but it has the original was the military significance of it.
Well, how did the Union reconcile drummers then? Because they used drummers as cadence for marching, didn't they?
Well, yeah, but I'm not following you. How do they recognize them? In what way?
In marching, they use a drummer to set the cadence for marching.
This was just something like This didn't have to do with keeping men in step. It was just something that they played.
It was a tradition, yeah.
And it was designed to kind of discombobulate the enemy.
Right.
To get them, fearful, hearing this strange sound coming at them in the midst of a battle.
Psychological warfare.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're coming up on the end of our first half hour, and we will be right back.
Okay. So now for a brief intermission. You're listening to Meet the Chicago Historians, and we thank you for it.
Hello, friends. Are you looking for a place to have some printing done? Well, I have the right place for you to go, and that is the printing store in Oak Park, Illinois. Call or see Phil Berry at 621 Madison Street, or call 708-383-3638. Phil Berry will sit down with you and help you plan whatever you need printed. Now, his products are brochures, booklets, business cards, catalogs, envelopes, letterheads, flyers, invitations, newsletters, notepads, menus, mailers, manuals, labels, posters, postcards, price list, NCR forms, sale sheets, table tents, pocket folders, and presentation forms. And he also has 1 to 4 color offset printing, digital copying, high-speed copying, graphic designs, typesetting, laminating, foil stamping, die cutting, and imprinting. And his complete bindery service includes booklets, cutting, scoring, folding, numbering, padding, and drilling. So once again, for all your printing needs, call or see Phil Berry at the printing store at 621 Madison Street in Oak Park, Illinois, or call 708-383-3638. They are located at Madison Street and Clarence, just east of Oak Park Avenue. And that's at 621 Madison Street in Oak Park, Illinois. Or give Phil Berry a call at 708-383-3638. For all your printing needs, the printing store was there to help you. They're 621 Madison Street in Oak Park, Illinois. And once again, you can call Phil Berry at 708-383-3638.
Now back to our edition of Meet the Chicago Historians. John?
Well, thank you very much, Rich Lang, and we're here again with mayors, presidents, and St. Patrick's Day. I don't know, does anybody have anything more they want to add on the subject of the Emerald Isle, or St. Patty's Day, or dyeing the Chicago River green? I heard on the broadcast that 1966 was when the first Mayor Daley, Richard Joseph Daley, inaugurated the modern St. Patrick's Day parade. There had been parades previously, but he was the one that began the tradition that's been ongoing ever since. And I think it was not too long after that. It may have been that year that they first dyed the river green. And I had a friend who was actually one of the team that does the dyeing of the river, and he was telling me how they announced this always on TV, that the dye is actually orange. That the dye is orange, but when it hits the water, it turns the water green.
And mixed, you know.
Yeah, and they come away just caked. He was telling me they come out of this just caked with the residue and the spray and everything. They're really a mess when they get out of that boat after finishing the.
Isn't it normally used in finding leaks in pipes?
Yeah. That was the origin of it. Yeah,
right.
It's the plumbers union that sponsors.
When they first started that, whatever they were using killed all of the fish in the river.
Didn't they put so much in there it stayed green for like a week?
Yeah, and whatever that was, and then they had to go to, scientists or whatever it was to get this new.
You mean back
formula.
Then there were actually fish in
Yeah,
the
that was
lake?
surprising. Any
Or
fish
in the
in the river?
river?
in those
Ale
days?
wives.
Sure there
They
was.
had ale wives in the river. Remember Mayor Daley saying the day would come when you could fish in the Chicago River. He would always talk about that. His goal was to clean the Chicago River to the point where you could fish. Downtown, you could drop a line into the river there and fish.
Right, you can fish there. I don't know if you want to eat.
But
That was his classic line. He said, "Yeah, for lunch you could go down and fish and catch a fish." And he says, "And there's nothing like a fish, nothing like a fish."
Maybe we need a little history involving Ireland. What is an Orange Man? What is the somewhat hostile view of
An Orange Man is someone
Ulster.
It would be a Protestant.
from Northern Ireland.
A Protestant, correct.
Right.
See, a lot of people don't understand that they think that Northern Ireland is the northern part of Ireland. It's not. It's a separate country. Ireland fought for their independence for centuries and centuries. The Irish were very extremely oppressed by the English.
Very much so.
Right.
They came. They took everything. They took their land.
Mm-hmm.
They took their language. You know, one of the biggest fallacies that people say, well, the reason that the Irish were successful when they first came to this country is because they spoke the language, they spoke English. Nothing could be further from the truth. The original Irish immigrants spoke Gaelic. They call it Gaeltacht. Now, the main influx of Irish immigrants after the famine were English speakers. But the original Irish, they never...
And people don't realize that there were Irish in America, Irish Americans, before the 1840s potato famine. There were...
Right.
But
I remember
came in because of the
George Washington issued orders that they would not celebrate Guy Fawkes Day. And if you know English history, Guy Fawkes Day, Guy Fawkes was a Catholic who supposedly was the head of a plot to blow up the Houses of Parliament. And this was at the time of England becoming Protestant. And in any event, he was apprehended, and Guy Fawkes Day became an annual celebration in the cold weather. And it turned into a sort of a Protestant celebration and a celebration directed against Catholics. And George Washington banned the celebration of Guy Fawkes Day because he said it would be offensive to the Irish Catholic soldiers in the U.S. Army, in the American Army, because there were Irish Catholics who were serving in our War of Independence, and Washington did not want want them to feel that they were somehow less American than the others.
Isn't that the day they celebrate with bonfires?
Yeah, it's a little bit like Halloween. It's kind of related to Halloween. It's in the fall. I think it's in November. I think Guy Fawkes Day is in November. And he banned the celebration of Guy Fawkes Day for that reason, because he looked upon it as an anti-Catholic celebration.
Do people in Ireland now know what corned beef and cabbage is?
We were talking about that earlier.
Yeah,
That's sort of become the accepted menu for St. Patrick's Day.
Yeah, but the corned beef and cabbage, that isn't big. The cabbage is, but not corned beef. They didn't eat a lot. Lamb was more the mutton, if they had meat.
Like shepherd's pie, perhaps.
But to get back to the difference between Northern Ireland, which is a separate country, still part of Great Britain, that was a compromise agreement. So they said, well, all right, we'll give... There's, I think...
Well, I think they made Ireland Dominion for a while.
There's 32 counties in Ireland, and 26 are in the Republic of Ireland, and 6 are in the north of Ireland. But that's going to be over with because by sheer attrition, the Irish Catholics are overwhelmingly the population of Northern Ireland, and that was the big thing. If you were from Northern Ireland, you were a Protestant, and if you were from the Republic of Ireland, you were Catholic. But now, almost the whole country there, for all intents and purposes, it is going to be united. I know this Brexit. Supposedly, the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland is basically going to be eliminated.
Well, it reset. They had this agreement in 1998, which essentially did away. There are no more checkpoints. There are no. You don't have to go through and declare anything. So the border is essentially just a marker, just a sign there that says welcome to Northern Ireland. But now with Britain exiting the European Union and Ireland staying in, the whole relationship of Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland is part of the reason they're having so much difficulty sorting this out, as to what what does it mean now when Northern Ireland's going to be outside of the European Union? The rest of the island is going to be in it.
You know, Don, you mentioned about the Catholics, doing away with the Catholics, and what really disturbs me, and well, a lot was on my mind when I see this big not poster, but board on the, as you go on the Montrose, is what I take all the time, going west, right by the Kennedy, where you could possibly see it on the Kennedy, is this big billboard. Time to quit the Catholic Church by the religious, what is it, the Religious Reformation Association or something.
Never heard
Great
of it.
big. Oh, I didn't either until I saw that. And I thought,
I mean,
what the hell is going on?
Yeah, and I'm a Protestant.
And it says something about value our children. Time to quit the
It's probably
Catholic Church.
I'm going to guess it's an anti-Catholic group that is trying to take advantage of the scandal in the church involving the
Well,
child
yes,
abuse. And
naturally it's an anti-Catholic
Yeah.
group, but
Right.
they're trying to capitalize now on this scandal.
it says something about the children. I think it's something with abortion.
I think so too.
Yeah, I think it's something with that. But I'll be damned if I'll find out about it or check on it,
Right.
or, you know, I don't know if they got a website or not.
Well, I mean, you touched on the abortion issue. Some of these new laws that they're passing throughout the states, I mean, in California, you know, I mean, you think about, you know, what are we, what is this country turning into? They want to put you in jail for using a plastic straw, but you can kill someone after they're born.
After they're born.
That's right.
I mean, is this insanity or
Right.
you know?
Yeah.
I heard there was a big to-do over the weekend about bear cubs. Someone had stolen 2 or 3 bear cubs from their den or wherever the bear cubs were, taken them away from their mother, and had put them out on the highway. Now, I hate the abuse of animals, and if you do anything abusive to animals, that is outrageous, and you should be punished for it. But I thought to myself, there are those who will get outraged over the fact that, you know, bear cubs are separated from their mother, who just blew off this issue some weeks ago when the governor of Virginia, the infamous governor of Virginia, was talking about how they would decide whether or not to snuff out the life of a baby after the baby had been born, because the mother might have wanted an abortion, and they would keep it comfortable while the mother and the doctor were making their decision.
Oh.
So, I mean, there's values here that says it's okay
But-
to snuff out the life
Right.
of a child that has already been born,
Right, but they're
because the abortion didn't work out the way they
the
planned.
child is born. Isn't he covered by the Constitution and
Well,
the
that-
Bill of
well,
Rights
that-
and
well,
due
that's
law?
the point.
You would think so.
If you can take away
Yeah.
the life of a child after a minute, why not an hour?
That's
Why
right.
not a day? Why not a week?
Yeah.
At what point, once the child is born, then it's just a matter of time.
Well, I always ask the question, you know, having 7 grandkids, and now with the, you know, since the invention of ultrasound, you know, you can look at your
Right.
future, and I always ask the question about, you know, pro-choice
No.
people.
Right.
It's that, you know, you're looking at this image. It's got a heartbeat. It's got a face, eyes, nose. It says 10 fingers and 10 toes. I mean, if that's
Can
not,
hear
if
you
that,
too.
well, if that's not a living person, what is it? And you know what? I got the answer from the choice people. You know what it is? It's a parasite.
Yeah.
It's a parasite living in a woman's body, and she has the right to destroy that parasite.
have
That's their.
You know,
Yes.
Well,
these
those people-
It's
politicians-
an
Those
argument if the
people
child
should-
is still not born, but once the baby is born, independent of the mother, that's it. I
Right.
can't see of any pro-choice types saying
No.
abortion
Yeah.
justified
I
after
think it's
birth.
even before
This is a
then.
totally
And
different
Once
taking-
the child has been born, again, whether it's a minute, a week, a year, the child is already outside of the womb.
It's a human
If you
being.
can-
It's
If you can
independent
take
of
the
its
life,
mother.
if you can
Yeah.
take the life after it's been born, then there's no limit. Then
Well-
there's no rational justification saying, well, why couldn't the mother decide a month later that she really doesn't need this baby?
Right.
and
If
I
you
want
if you
this
can
to-
Just
justify
on
that,
the
you can
op-
you can justify anything. And you know what? Their rationale, and again taking the choice people's reasoning, a woman that aborts a baby has courage.
Yeah.
See, and they're thinking, but in my way of thinking, the woman who has the child and raises it's the one with courage. The
Exactly.
one that destroys the child is a coward.
That's right.
I would agree with that.
But they
Yeah.
Well, you
again.
know,
And a lot of this started with the doctors wanting parts of the babies,
Right. It's a business.
and
That's-
it
that's
was
one of the-
always a
the
business.
church,
That's where the
yeah.
one of
money
the very
is.
unsavory
Yeah.
secrets of
Right.
Yeah.
And what gets me is you get the politicians. They're definitely against capital punishment, but they'll kill a baby.
Yeah, and as I
Yeah.
say, they will become enraged at someone snuffing out snail darters or
Right.
Right.
some obscure species. They will march and protest that, and they're perfectly fine with the mother. And I think the New York legislature passed comparable legislation at that time. They got a standing ovation, as I recall, for the same thing that would enable a child that had already been born to be exterminated because of what Al Gore used to call a woman's right to choose. It wasn't choice; it was right to choose.
Well, on the other end of the equation, what's next when people get old enough? Are they not? It's going to cost too much to keep them alive. Then it'll be cheaper, fiscally cheaper or financially cheaper, just to
And they love to equate Trump with Hitler. This is something that smacks of Nazi Germany.
Exactly.
I don't think Hitler even did
Euthanasia.
I was
that.
going to make the point that 80 years ago, the people in an otherwise civilized nation were able to persuade themselves that Jews were not human beings. They were able to
Right.
to convince themselves that if you were a Jew, you were somehow not a human being. It's the same thing. If you're able to persuade yourself that what is obviously a human being isn't,
well,
because it suits your political point
I
of
think
view.
with politicians and Trump, they can't come up with a reason, to oppose them. So they just start calling them names like kids do.
Well,
Oh yeah. What's this world coming to?
I'm just wondering now, in some predominantly Catholic countries like Ireland, is abortion totally still illegal in Ireland, no matter what
No,
stage of?
I think it's legal.
first trimester?
I think it's legal now
Now that's
in Ireland.
an interesting
yeah.
development.
Just
And at what stage? Which trimester?
Recently.
Yeah, I thought I had heard that.
One of the
yeah.
problems with this scandal that is raking the Catholic Church throughout the world, you just had a cardinal in Australia sentenced to 5 or 6 years in prison for child abuse, is that it is certainly it's destroying the Church's moral authority. It's making it hard for the Church to make moral arguments because the enemies of the Church are just going to throw this right in the face of anyone saying, "How can you tell us how to live our lives when all of this has been going on in the Catholic Church?"
Yeah,
That's-
and
that is
right,
a
and
byproduct of
the
this.
sad part about it again is, and this is coming from a devout Catholic, they've known about this. I remember as far back, when Phil Donahue was still on television. How long ago was that? 20 years, and he had a Catholic priest on that talked about situations in the Catholic Church, and all he brought up was about homosexuality, about priests, and he was a homosexual. Again, this is a long time ago, and he said, "Well, I took the vow of chastity. I'm not practicing, but I'm a homosexual, just like you're a heterosexual. Priests are heterosexuals, but they don't, take the vow of chastity." And he was ostracized, and every person that I knew of criticized, and that's outrageous, and how dare him say this. And so they've known about it a long time. And again, the homosexual, the gay community takes they are relating, like they say, they are trying to relate pedophilia with homosexuality, and it's two completely different
Very
things.
much so.
You know,
Very much so.
and a lot of these priests were pedophiles, and some were just homosexuals. But it's apples and oranges. You know,
They tried to protect their own by transferring them here and there and not giving them a taste of what the law is, and that's where this whole thing came from. You know, those guys that did that, they should be punished too.
Well, a lot of people in power, they figure they're above the law. It doesn't apply to them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think there was this desire I'm sure they thought that they could handle it internally, and that they would, if you transferred someone, the problem would go away. But what's staggering is this was happening all over the world. It's not isolated. They're finding it all
Right.
over the world.
Mm-hmm.
And to what extent is it just limited to the Catholic Church?
Oh no.
Yeah.
Oh no.
Some get to keep in
Right.
mind
No.
too.
Oh,
No,
and that's the thing.
no.
You know, what about the Lutherans, the Protestants,
It's-
the
Right.
Jews?
Yeah.
That you know what problem? But it's just that the Catholics took the brunt.
There are folks that aren't fond of the Catholic Church, and particularly
Well,
in our
it's-
media, because of issues like abortion and gay marriage, and so they're using this as a crowbar against
Right.
Right, and it's
Church.
and a Catholic priest is one of the I saw a list about people that you can still speak negatively about. You know, and Catholic priest
Oh,
is one.
sure.
Southerners are another
Oh, sure.
group. You know, if you're from Alabama, you can affect the Southern dialect and act like you're not intelligent, and that's fine. But you can't affect a black accent and
No, of
pretend,
course not.
because that's racist. But
Right.
it's fine. A Southern white you can still ridicule.
Right.
There's absolutely nothing wrong with
It is
that.
racist and wrong to ridicule any group in our society that votes for liberals.
Right.
That's
Good.
the definite-
Well,
That sums it up.
And if you're liberal and you don't agree with everything they say, you're a racist. A question. Being a Protestant, is the Catholic Church the only church that enforces celibacy?
At that level, if you're in the Greek, and I don't speak as an expert, the Eastern Orthodox religions, you may be married as a priest. If you wish to advance to become a bishop, then I believe you must remain celibate. Bishops are celibate. And I don't speak as an expert, but this is what I understand.
Okay.
But the actual the ordinary clergy, the priests, they are permitted to
So
marry.
can they advance priests to bishops?
No, well, you must remain unmarried if you wish to
Oh,
become
okay.
a bishop.
Okay.
It's kind of like, well, in the church, the deacons. You can be a married deacon.
Right.
In the Catholic Church, they have.
Oh, I didn't
they
know
now
they even
they
had
now
that.
have they have this category of deacons, and you can be unmarried and be a deacon, or you can be married and be a deacon. But if you have any aspiration to become a priest, you must be unmarried.
Okay.
It's the shortage of priests. They have deacons who can do certain things to
Yeah,
ease
right.
the fact that there aren't as
They
many
can
priests as
distribute
there used to be.
communion. I think they
Yeah.
can perform marriages and
Does
baptisms.
celibacy-
They can't. A deacon cannot celebrate mass,
Right.
but he can distribute communion that has already
Okay.
been consecrated.
Now, does that apply to nuns also?
Well, nuns. That's a
Entirely
whole story
different,
because you
yeah.
can't.
Oh, okay. I'm
You,
just asking.
Yeah.
you can't. Women are not accepted.
I
as
tell you a
priests.
little story that Mike Schumacher, the police Knights of Columbus Grand Night, and I ran into. There was a priest, and I won't name names. He's deceased now. His father was a police sergeant on the Chicago Police. But anyway, this priest came out as an associate to a suburban parish, and they had an article in the paper on him that he came from California, and that he was married and had a couple of kids, and he came to Chicago, always wanted to be a priest, and now he was one. So I was very, very nosy. I mean, not only on that, but on another situation for my grandson who wanted to get in the movie business. I went over there and talked to him because he was in our parish, and it was very interesting. He was the financial CEO of a major movie company, in fact, the one that made Backdraft. And he lived on on the ocean there. What do they call it in California? That area. Malibu. He lived right next to Tom Hanks, and he had a couple of kids, a wife, a couple of kids, and I knew all about that, but I was interested in this other reason that I went to see him for my grandson, and I invited him to a combined St. Michael and St. Florian Police and Fire KC meeting, and I told Mike, I says, I'm going to come with a couple $100 bills and give one to some guy to have him get up there and say, hey, how did you do that? You know, she was still living.
Really?
Kids were still living. Yeah.
That's unusual.
He was a semi-pro boxer. He was a hell of a guy. Just really nice guy. And it doesn't make any difference. He's passed away now. Ted Schmidt was his name. And they took him out of wherever he wanted when they got divorced or whatever happened. I imagine an annulment, a church annulment.
That's the first I heard of that.
He came to Chicago, and they sent him out to, like I say, where we were. And then from there, after I talked to him and that, I just couldn't believe it. What an interesting guy. But anyway, they sent him to St. Monica's over at Foster and Foster and Harlem or wherever it is around there. And they had some kind of a mope there that wasn't working out, and they got rid of him. And they put Ted in there, and he straightened it out. I mean, he was a financial wizard. He straightened the place out. And so it never happened that he came to a meeting, a combined meeting. Something came up. He didn't come there, and I was very disappointed because I wanted to know. I didn't have guts enough to ask him myself.
What?
But anyway, he then went to St. Monica's and he straightened that place out. Well, now he evidently, if the bishop, the cardinal, wants to transfer somebody, they have to put in a transfer request. And so that's what he did. Because somebody buzzed the cardinal's ear that, hey, we have problems, and money problems, and look at what this guy does. Let's get him down here, and he'll straighten this whole Diocese of Chicago out. We won't have any more problems. And so that was what was going to happen. And then another guy got the other cardinal's ear and said, hey, we can't do that. All this money that he's got, this all comes from Hollywood and California and divorced and, bad people and that. We can't be accepting that dirty money.
Money is money.
Yeah. and so the cardinal then says, oh, yeah, you're right. Well, in the meantime, they had transferred Ted to the southwest side somewhere, some parish out there. And he didn't like it very well, and I don't know what happened, but it's
like the college coach. They talking about the caliber of its players. He says, I don't care if they're members of Al-Qaeda. If they can play ball,
Yeah.
if they can play ball, I want them.
And on that
Pardon me,
cheery
gentlemen.
note, folks,
We'll be right back after these messages of interest and importance.
Pain? Do you know someone that has constant pain of their low back, neck, shoulder, knee, or wrist? Have they tried medications, exercise, physical therapy, or chiropractic, and nothing seemed to make it better? Well, I may have your answer. Why not try a napropath? Hi everybody, this is Dr. Wayne Chickowitz, and I've been practicing 30 years treating pain. I'm board certified and hold a diplomate in pain management. For your convenience, we have 2 locations. In Cicero, 3602 South 61st Avenue, 708-656-7000, or in Villa Park at 122 West St. Charles Road, Suite 1A, 630-833-4007. Why not try a napropath and stop the pain today?
John?
ladies and gentlemen, I'm John Escochoco. I'm here with you now as we're going into our second hour of our March edition of Meet the Chicago Historians. We've been away for a couple of months. If you've been looking for us, we were on an extended cruise planning our future radio broadcasts. We avoided the horrendous weather here. That's why we weren't on the air in January or February. It's a fabulous cruise that the John DeVita Broadcast Center provided us on.
That's right.
On the yacht. We have the John DeVita Broadcast yacht that's moored at also an equally undisclosed location,
That's
ladies
right.
and gentlemen. So don't look for the yacht. We can't take passengers along.
We got
But
All booked.
we've been preparing for this show now for a couple of months that we were off the air, and we've talked about St. Patrick's Day and about a bit about the Catholic Church. It was kind of a carry on from St. Patrick's Day. But I thought maybe now in our next hour we'd move into the February intended portion of our program, mayors and presidents. And we had a mayoral, I guess you would call it a primary election, although it's no longer party. Candidates in Chicago don't run under party labels anymore. And there were many candidates, and 2 emerged as the contenders. So I am not a Chicagoan, but I know we have Chicagoans and longtime Chicagoans on our panel. So if we would like to say anything at this point about either mayors past or present or future of the city of Chicago.
I'd like to say in the last mayoral election in Chicago, I'm one of the few people that didn't run for mayor in the city of Chicago.
That makes you
lot of
kind of a
I think there
celebrity.
were
You were not on
about
the ballot.
what were there, about 112, 112 candidates.
That made the final cut.
That's right.
Oh, boy.
14, I think, was in the primary.
Yeah.
They had to have them in tiers, I think, on the debates. On the WTTW, they'd have a half a dozen of them one week,
Right.
another half a
That was
dozen
a problem.
the following week. And
Well, you know, again, talking about elections for a second, it's an absolute disgrace, in my opinion, that only, I believe this last election, 30% of registered voters turned out. But now you have to, that's 30% of registered voters.
Yeah.
It's probably about 10% of eligible voters.
Yeah.
So that means basically 90% of the people that lived in Cook County or Chicago didn't make the effort to cast a vote. That's a disgrace. I mean, one of the best lines I heard on election day was, this was years ago, and it was in the newspaper. It said, "Today, do something that millions and millions of people around the world wish that they could do.
Right.
Vote."
well, that's the answer, is that Americans take it for granted. And we've
Exactly.
always had the right, and so it doesn't mean as much
Yeah.
to people that lived behind the Iron Curtain or lived in any dictator. And the world is filled with dictatorships even today. And so many of these people would probably give their right arm to be able to vote for who their El Supremo is going to be.
That's
but
right.
they don't get the opportunity.
Well, I talked to a number of Chicagoans who, because of the numbers in the primary, they just couldn't make themselves come to a decision. So they purposely bypassed the primary with the so-called intention of deciding on the final
Well, I
mayoral
would
race.
venture, I would venture
Not a good
to
answer.
say that this is going to be the lowest voter turnout in the history of the city of Chicago this next election.
And how many of those live 6 feet under?
Eddie Burke, who we can talk about. Eddie Burke tells the story himself. He said he was in Indiana and he met one of his former constituents, a woman in her 80s, and she told him, she said, "Eddie, when I die, I want to be buried in Chicago because I want to stay active in politics."
Good one. Good one.
Well, they always say that Chicago believes everyone should be able to vote. Why should you lose your right to vote just because you've died? You know,
Right.
It seems unfair to discriminate against
That
the
you
dead.
brought up Eddie Burke's name. I was waiting for a little spot here to get in. On the 23rd of this month, which is next Saturday, at the Mayfair, I believe that's the name of it, the Mayfair Club on the south side. Is it some type of a
Oh, there's a banquet hall.
banquet hall?
Mayfield, I think.
Or Mayfield?
Yeah,
Okay.
It's on Archer and Mayfield.
That's it.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
it.
it's on Archer Avenue.
Okay, they're having and this is the Knights of Columbus of the police, St. Michael's, are celebrating their 21st
I recently
anniversary.
joined. I'm a member.
Oh, did you? Okay. Dennis, who's here with us,
Dennis
is the Grand Knight, and they are honoring Father Dan Brandt as the Member of the Year, I guess they're calling it, and also the all of the FOP presidents will be there too, and it should be quite a situation. And I talked to Dennis yesterday because he knows that I'm tight with Burke to get him to come too, because he's belonged for like 60 years to the St. Michael's.
Well, he's a former police officer, wasn't he? As a very
Yes,
young man,
yes,
was a
he
police
was.
officer
Yes, he
before,
was,
before
yeah.
he got into politics.
Right. So he joined, and you know, he's so he'll be there, I'm sure, and we expect a big crowd, very big
Yeah, I won't
crowd.
be able to. I'll be in Quebec City with the police bagpipe band
Oh, wow.
playing in their St. Patrick's Day parade.
Oh, okay.
I've attended many dinners and functions at the Mayfield. The food there is quite good. They have good food.
Is it?
Yeah.
I think the tickets are $70 a piece.
It's close to Cicero, and there are a lot of some of our
It's the
parish organizations
Mayfield,
have
huh?
banquets there.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's a nice place.
Oh,
A
A lot of places close to Cicero.
Absolutely.
I live in one of those
It's
places.
the crossroads of the Western world.
Western Electric.
Yeah, Western Electric, the industrial behemoth. It was once true that Cicero was the second largest industrial community in the state of Illinois. There were more industrial jobs in Cicero than in any other city, town, or village in the state other than the city of Chicago, which is 50 times the size of Cicero. We were second, and that was largely due to Western Electric and a few other. You know, we had some real behemoths in Cicero in
Right,
those
along
days.
Roosevelt Road.
Yeah, yeah.
John, wasn't it true that Western Electric hired a fair number of blacks in the old days? We're going back to the 20s and 30s, but
I'm sure they
these
did.
blacks had to be off the streets of Cicero by a certain amount of time.
Well,
I-
that's the kind of thing I hear.
You hear that in about a number of suburbs,
I-
North
you
Shore.
know,
Yeah.
All I can tell you is that Western Electric, I think at its peak during World War II, they employed
No, we're
over 40,000 people.
That
And
makes
when
sense.
in the 70s, they were still around 20,000, I believe.
Right.
And then they began cutting back, and then it was down to like 13,000. But I remember they had a big reception commemorating their anniversary, and the theme in the 1970s, the theme was Western Electric, here to stay.
Right.
And it was just a few years later
Well,
that they were no longer here to
Were
stay.
they the sole manufacturer of telephones for
Yes.
a while?
I think they may well have been, but they manufactured all sorts of
right.
other things.
Switchboards,
They manufactured the
wire.
switchboards, the wire. Yeah,
Yeah.
they had a huge wire manufacturing
Right.
Operation.
They even
They
recycled
manufactured
phones. They ground them up
Electric
and made new
motors,
phones.
Oh.
Right.
there were all sorts of. And during the Depression, they were making furniture and just to keep people
Furniture.
working, to give jobs for people.
No.
It was incredible the number of things that they manufactured. And during the war, of course, they did all sorts of communications equipment for the armed forces.
Was that part of
It was
AT&T?
Oh, sure. Western Electric was the manufacturing arm of American Telephone and
Or
Telegraph.
as I say, AT&T.
That was their manufacturing arm. You had the Bell system. You had Western Electric did all of the manufacturing.
And now all that's left
How
is
many-
the tower.
They had their
correct?
own police force. They had their own fire
Interesting.
department. They had their own fire engine.
I
on the
know.
grounds.
Okay.
I got a story
They
about
had
that
their
one.
own hospital. They actually they didn't just have them. They had I believe they had a hospital with beds, and they
That's
could
right.
care for somebody there with something serious. It
Wow.
was just an
These need to be
incredible
researched.
operation.
And how many people depended on Western Electric to pay their mortgages, and
Oh, sure.
especially Berwyn and Cicero?
Oh, sure. Many employees. My family had a grocery business, and my dad would take his vacation in the summer because there was a time when Western would shut down. It would actually shut down during the summer. Most of the Western Electric employees would take their vacation. And I remember he coincided his vacation when so many of his customers would be on vacation
Right.
at that time, too.
Right.
So,
And
it
what was
just-
his most famous employee? George Hallis.
I think I've heard
And
that.
he
right.
missed. He
That's
missed
right.
the
And he missed, the Eastland disaster.
by
Yeah.
15 minutes.
Yeah.
He was because that was Western Electric employees.
Sure.
They had a Albright Field, which was a field house, just as you would have in the Chicago Park District or our Cicero Park. They had their own field house with property as recreational facilities for their employees. I mean, Albright Field was there as a recreational facility for the employees of Western Electric, and they had sports teams
Right.
and sewing circle. They had all sorts of activities for the
Oh,
families.
John,
in
what
the
would you
20s.
say? Over 100 acres at least?
It's huge.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's
Yeah.
huge. It's now, in fact, the site of Albright Field is now where the town hall is located. The town took over that much of that property now, and it's the town hall and the police department complex
On
and
Cermak Road.
On Cermak Road.
Now, does that take up the building that used to be Al Capone's hotel? There was a one right around there.
I don't. You know, again, I always tell people I never had any interest in that, and
You always hear about that.
I'm a little bit taken aback when the only thing people want to talk about
Right.
when Cicero is Al Capone. The town of Cicero was established in 1857. It's been around for 150 years, long before Al Capone.
Right.
I mean, that was part of it, but it was a brief part of our history. It was the 1920s, and I always tell people, Capone lived in New York. He controlled much of the city of Chicago. He vacationed for a time at government expense on a little island off the coast of San Francisco,
Right.
and he died in Florida.
Right.
So, there are many other places throughout the United States that have a claim to Al Capone's legacy. And
Right.
I'm always a little bit irritated when people try to just fasten that on the town of Cicero. Yeah, sure it happened. Prohibition happened. Prohibition happened all over the United
That put
States.
them in business.
There were gangland episodes in New York and Boston and all over and out west and in Seattle.
Right.
So the notion that this was all Cicero is a little bit overdone. So
And
anyway,
Chicago had
that's
elected
my-
a reformed mayor, and that's one reason that Capone moved.
Yeah,
to,
he supposedly
Cicero.
moved his operations
Yeah.
to Cicero briefly while they sorted out the political. While
Right.
Big Bill Thompson, before he got back into power in
Right.
the city of Chicago.
But
And,
it's
it-
he's not the patron saint of the,
no,
of the
but
town of
it's
Cicero.
probably going to live forever.
It's like
Oh,
we
yeah,
can't,
yeah, it's
we
a
can't let
fact. I
Capone be
understand.
the patron saint of Chicago either.
But
Yeah.
I like to push back, and of course that's why Mayor Daley had the garage torn down on Clark Street because he didn't want people only thinking of Chicago. I mean, he had the same attitude. He didn't like people thinking of Chicago strictly in terms of the roaring 20s and machine guns rolling down the streets, blasting away at people.
He discouraged a lot of movies from being
To
filmed.
change
Yeah.
the subject,
Yeah.
I heard, and it sounds feasible, but I don't know if it's true I heard that he had Riverview Park torn down because he was afraid of race riots. You ever hear anything about that?
That's like they say, who knows?
It's
I mean,
been
that's
part of it.
like
I thought somebody offered a nice big price for that property.
Right. But, that's one of those things.
Yeah,
but you
those
hear
things
these
like
things,
Cicero.
People always want to believe that there's a hidden reason behind everything that
Sure.
happens. If something happens that they don't understand, it's got to be a
Right.
conspiracy.
Conspiracy
It's gotta be
theories.
somebody,
Right.
somebody, those guys, they knew what they, take all that with it. Well, we've mentioned a couple of Chicago mayors. We've mentioned Big Bill Thompson. Yeah, we mentioned Richard J. Daley. Anyone ever have? I imagine being in the police department, you interacted with Chicago mayors. Anybody got any stories of the first Mayor Daley or Mayor Byrne that they'd like to share with us? Or?
Oh, go ahead, Bill.
You of course know that I was very active with the union, and when we got to the point where things were getting very bad on the Chicago Fire Department, manpower-wise, apparatus-wise, and so forth, we went to see Daley, the old man. There were about 6 or 7 of us, and we were then told that only 2 or 3 of us could go in and see him, and so I was one of them, and Bill Reddy, and I forget who else, but anyway, his exact words were, "When you better get a contract, if that's what you're looking for, before I die." And those were his exact words. And within a month, he was dead.
I was going to ask, was that close to his
death?
Yeah,
close to
yeah.
76, whatever it was.
And then, of course, we went through Blandick and then Byrne. And Jane Byrne, everybody thought we hated her that much, which was a media farce, because Moon and, again, Bill Reddy and myself went up to see her, and her exact words were, "You're going to get your contract." Says, "We'll get you, but you're going to have to work for it." And we did. We had to go on strike, so we had to work for it.
Huh.
It's.
Is that what she meant?
Yeah,
That's what she meant. Well, she
How do you
she
work?
knew that we
You
were.
strike in order for this to happen?
She knew that we were talking strike, and that we were going to have to work for it, because she wasn't just going to hand that out. Our strike brought collective bargaining to the whole state of Illinois, all public, police, fire, and so forth. That's where collective bargaining got for the rest of the people.
Speaking of Jane Byrne, I think it was a media thing, but remember about the housing projects? She moved into
She
one.
moved into one.
How
yeah.
long did she stay there? A couple nights, if that?
I think it was 2 or 3 weeks, I think. It was
Yeah.
a
More than
week.
just 1 or 2 nights.
No, it was more than that.
Yeah.
Was it?
Yeah, it was
I was
more
just
than-
curious.
It was
'cause
about
I
a
never,
week.
after she moved in, I never heard very much about it after that at all.
Don't forget, her husband was a
Gene
what was he with the Sun Times?
Gene
Sun Times.
Okay.
He was a reporter,
Jay
and
Sun.
Jay kept a lot of things going in there. Yeah, Jay McMullen. And I just see Kathy Byrne in the paper the other day,
Oh, really? What she,
a day or two, something with the Lightfoot.
Now, she was
Preckwinkle.
supporting Preckwinkle, I think.
Was that what
I
it
thought
was?
so. Not, I might
Could
be
be,
wrong.
I
I think it was
forget what it was,
Preckwinkle rather
yeah.
than Lightfoot. She was
Yeah.
working on the campaign.
But everybody seems to. I know police and fire. Most of your unions are going with Lightfoot.
yeah, supposedly she's got about a 30 percentage point
Yeah.
lead.
Whoever thought
That is very
that we would come to this point, huh? Whoever thought?
I met Blandick, and I met Richard M. Daley. I saw Mayor Daley once. I was downtown at City Hall when something was happening, and I was down at City Hall for, I don't know, I'd had to get a form or something. There was a reason why I was in City Hall, and cameras came through, and a crowd of people, and the lights, the TV, and there's Mayor Daley walking in the center of this crowd, and there was some dignitary with him. I don't know who the dignitary was. There was some dignitary visiting Chicago. So I did see him in person. I never had the privilege of meeting Richard J. Daley, but I did see him live.
Our headquarters was room 105 in City Hall. It was always the Chicago Fire Department's headquarters, and I had to go down there for something one day, whether it was fire department or personal. I had my uniform on, and I had to go upstairs, I think I was going up to the fire alarm office. But anyway, I got into the elevator, and then all of a sudden, copper comes over, holds the door, and who comes into the elevator but Daly
Himself.
with his bodyguards. And I had just seen him sitting at the desk, and he looked like a, pretty good sized figure.
Short.
And I looked at him and I thought, is this our big mayor here, for Christ's sake? I can look over his head.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Was that
And
J
then
or M?
Another story.
Jay, I think. No, Richard J. Daly.
Richard J. Daly,
Oh, okay.
the old man. I was the captain of Engine 19, which was right near where the headquarters is now, 35th Street, and or I should say, Engine 19. And we would get details for an officer over at Engine 29 all the time. That was right down the street from Mayor Daly's house. Mm-hmm. And so I told the lieutenant, I said, do you mind going over there? He was a black guy. He says, I hate going over there and that. I says, I tell you what, Bill. His name was Bill, too. I says, let's ask the chief and let him switch this detail from me to you, and maybe we'll cut it in half. So it was my turn. I think it was on a Sunday. I had a Irish setter. It was always with me. Blaze was the dog's name. And beautiful Irish setter. She was with me. I go over there. We had brunch or whatever it was that they were making after we ate. I told the engineer, I says, if we get a run, I says, pick me up. I says, I'll be going around the block. I got to take the dog out. Dog's got to get out. He said, okay, so I get out. I start walking south, and I see the squad car in front of Daly's house. It was always there. And the copper is sitting in there, and I thought I had recognized him. So I walked over that way, and I never had that dog on a leash. She was very, very well trained, and I'm talking to the copper, and all of a sudden, his face just kind of lit up, and he looked. His eyes got big. I said, "What's the matter, Jim?" He says, points like this. I turned around. Here's good old Blaze making a big pile right on top of Daly's house. I said, Jimmy, I'll see you. Take care. Boom. And I got out of there right away. I wish I had we'd had one of these, a picture now.
My favorite story of Mayor Daly, one of my favorite stories, was when I was listening to the radio the day after the November election in 1962, which was when Everett Dirksen, the Republican senator, was running for re-election in Illinois. It was a congressional election. Right. Kennedy was president at the time. And a Democrat by the name of Sidney R. Yates, who I think was a United States congressman, was the Democratic nominee against him. And this is a month after the Cuban Missile Crisis. Okay. And during the Cuban Missile Crisis, President Kennedy had sent an Air Force plane to Illinois to bring Everett Dirksen back to Washington, because he was the Senate Republican leader, to be briefed on what was going on in the Cuban Missile Crisis. Now, this cinched, if there was any doubt that Everett Dirksen was going to be reelected or not, the fact that the President of the United States sends an Air Force plane to Chicago to bring him back because he needs his advice and counsel during this great national crisis. I mean, Yates didn't have a snowball's chance in Hades of being elected. And even before that, Dirksen was an immensely, hard to believe we actually had Republican senators from Illinois in those days. But he was an immensely popular figure. He came from a little town called Pekin. Well, anyway, this was my freshman year in high school in Fenwick, and that morning I got up and I wanted to hear the election return. So I turned the radio on, and it's early in the morning, and they had a live hookup. I think it was WIND. They had a live hookup. WBBM was not doing News Radio 78 in those days. WIND. And they had a reporter out at Mayor Daley's home on Low Avenue in Bridgeport to get his analysis of what happened, And the reporter said, "Wait a minute, he said, folks, the mayor's just coming out of his home, and I think we may be able to get a brief. Mr. Mayor, could you talk about the election, the Senate election yesterday?" Yates lost. well, yes, we understand that, Mr. Mayor, but do you have any analysis as to why that happened? He didn't get enough votes. Well, I understand that, Mayor, but what is your insight as chairman of the Democratic Committee? Not enough people voted for him. And then you heard the door of his car slam, and you heard the car accelerate. And Roy says, "Well, Bill, there you have it. You've just heard Mayor Richard J. Daley's analysis of the Senate election in Illinois yesterday." He was one of a kind. I mean, there was never anybody, certainly never anybody in Chicago, maybe never any other mayor in. I don't know if maybe Fiorello LaGuardia was kind of unique, or Giuliani in New York, but he was one of a kind in terms of.
They had a book. It was it was a takeoff on quotations from Chairman Mao.
Yeah.
It was quotations from Chairman Bill, and some of the quotes in there are some of my favorites. Reporter asked him about corruption. Some cases in the many cases about corruption. He says, "Yeah, sure. There's corrupt politicians. There's corrupt news media people too. As a matter of fact, I could spit on a couple from there."
He doesn't hold back.
Robert's Rules of Order is the greatest book ever written.
Yeah.
And he knew it. He knew one of the reasons he was successful. He knew parliamentary procedure. He knew how to outmaneuver people
in the Democratic National Convention, the one after his delegation was unseated, and who was it? Bill Singer and Jesse, and they were seated, but there was a big controversy, so he missed an election. So the following Democratic National Convention, some reporter blocks his passage. There was no way, because Daley was trying to walk by him, so he figured, well, I can't. So he goes into this very elaborate commentary about, now we're here with Richard J. Daley, the mayor of Chicago now. Now, Mr. Mayor, and he goes on and on about, last election you weren't seated. Now this year, and he goes on and on and on. And finally, he sticks the microphone in Daley's face, and Daley says, "Excuse me, I'm going to get a sandwich." And that was it. He blew right by him.
They always said no other politician in America would treat the press the way Daley did, because he had utter contempt for them, and he let them know he had contempt for them, right. And he made no attempt to sugarcoat it or
kind of like Trump.
Yeah,
right.
But Daley.
Well, one of fan of Mike Roy.
One of the favorite comments after the '68 Democratic National Convention, they say there are quite a few politicians can say that they brought a national convention of their party to their state. There are a few politicians that can say they brought a national convention to their city, but there's only one politician that can say they brought the national convention to their neighborhood.
That's right.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah. Was it Daley? Somebody asked him, "Can I speak to you?" And he says, "You mean now?" He was either that or Yogi Berra, one of the two.
And he was dedicating a park or a firehouse somewhere. He was doing one of his ribbon cutting, and Jimmy Breslin, the New Yorker political writer who has since passed away, was doing a story about Daley, and I think he got into limousine. He had enough of notoriety that Daley invited him to come along in the limo with him. And when he's doing the dedication, his press secretary comes up, "Mr. Mayor, you've got it's 1:00 and you're due at City Hall at 1:15 for a press conference." And Daley's reaction was like, "Let him wait." He shook hands for another half hour,
right.
Had his picture taken,
right.
Met with some of the local pals from that ward, and Breslin was just amazed. He said no New York politician would have the nerve to just ignore the press that way. They'd be scared stiff. Mm-hmm. Whoever was mayor, this was not Giuliani, but whoever was, he says, the mayor in New York, maybe this was Lindsay, he wouldn't dream of keeping the press. They'd be afraid of what the press would write about them the next. Daley couldn't care less. It was the
Yeah,
press was
right.
the least important of his responsibilities. Let him wait.
Yeah, talking about
Let him wait.
nepotism under his administration, and his classic line was, "Don't send me nobody that nobody sent."
What he said.
Yeah, and
That wasn't.
they asked him another time about this person Daley says, "Yeah, I know. I knew his father, and I know his father before him. Who am I supposed to hire? Strangers?"
That's right. Is it true that his license? I think it was Jay Daley, but his license number was in the number of votes he got in his first election.
That was him.
The first election? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there was quite a few digits too. The number of votes that he got in that election. That was in
56.
50,
Okay.
First time he was elected was in 55.
Now the state senate, he ran as a Republican, right? A Republican.
He ran as a
term.
Republican.
And then he switched as soon as he got
And
elected.
it was purely fictitious. That was in the days of multi-member districts. There were 3, and there were already 2 Democrats from that district. So he simply filed as a Republican so that he could fill the one remaining seat. There was going to be a Republican elected, so they elected him. And as soon as he got to Springfield, he declared himself a Democrat, which was he could get away with, and voted with the Democrats.
His son ran as a Republican
break,
for
ladies
state's
and-
attorney too, didn't he?
We're coming up on a break, ladies and gentlemen.
Yes, it's time for another brief intermission. You've been listening to Meet the Chicago Historians.
Well, friends, this is already the month of March, and in just another week or so, we'll be going into the spring season. Now, we have had quite a severe winter as far as I'm concerned this year. Very heavy winds and very cold weather, and now is the time to stick your head out the window and check on your roof. With the high winds, you could have lost some shingles, or you could have had some roof damage. And now is the time to check on your roof before the heavy rain, the spring rains arrive and can do more damage to your home. So don't wait and for the weather to get real bad. Check your roof, sidings, and gutters on your home, and make sure that you don't have any leaks, or you don't want any mildew in your crawl space, or drip on your ceilings in your rooms, or have your walls damaged by leaky gutters or bad siding. Don't have double expense, friends. Sooner or later, you've got to get it taken care of. So call Best Brothers Roofing, Siding, and Gutters at area code 630-616-1359. Mike Best will drive over in a shiny red truck with ladders on top, and he'll get out, check your roof, measure it, give you an estimate, and go from there. So therefore, friends, again, with the severe high winds that we have had the last couple months, you want to make sure you did not lose any shingles, or any shingles didn't come loose to cause any kind of leaks or damage to your roof, siding, or gutters. So again, call Best Brothers Roofing, Siding, and Gutters at area code 630-616-1359. Call today, Best Brothers Roofing, Siding, and Gutters, and their number is 630-616-1359. Call today for a free estimate, and you will be completely satisfied.
Back to our show. John.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We're at our March edition of Meet the Chicago Historians. We're at the John DeVita Broadcast Center, this elaborate underground command center that we have here. Once a month, we regale you with stories about the history of our city, our state, our country. And today we're at our March edition, the 18th of March. We're the day that is the dividing line between St. Patrick's Day and St. Joseph's Day. And we're talking about mayors, presidents, and St. Patrick's Day. We've talked about St. Patrick's Day in our first 30, 45 minutes or so. We've talked about the mayors of Chicago, and we were regaling everyone with stories about the late great Richard Joseph Daley, mayor of Chicago from 1955 until 1976. Great man, a legendary figure. If you were alive at the time, you knew him as one of the premier political figures, not only of the city and state, but of the country at a national standing. And, of course, his son succeeded him as mayor, and his other son was a candidate but was not successful in the recent multi-member primary for mayor of the city of Chicago. He came in close. I think he was the fourth, I believe, in the balloting. And, of course, no one got a tremendous number of votes because there were so many candidates on the ballot. But any other wind-ups? Anybody else have anything they'd like to add about either Mayor Daley or any other mayor?
Richard M. totally stayed out of his brother's race for mayor, I think. I didn't hear anything or any comment or interview with Richard M. regarding Bill Daley's run.
I was watching election night, and he mentioned that his brother was there at the headquarters, but they never showed a picture. They never, the cameras didn't, so I never saw him. But I'm almost certain I heard him say that his brother was there in the room. Or maybe maybe he wasn't in the room. Maybe he was in the hotel. But no, I did not see him at the.
And I think that was done on purpose too.
Yeah, he's really aged. I saw him.
Really,
he's had health problems, I believe, too, hasn't he? He's had some.
I don't remember.
You'll remember Maggie Daley's fight with cancer. Then you hear every so often that Richard M. is dating other women. Maybe this is not in the recent past. If he's got health issues that are overriding concerns.
I thought he had health problems.
I think I heard that too.
Well,
maybe not.
He's got to be my age because my cousins lived right down the street from him, and I might have played with him, but I don't know. But we played on that block a lot.
Isn't he about like maybe 74 or something like that?
No, that's what I am.
My brother's age. Yeah,
I'm 74.
I know his other brother, the Cook County Commissioner. They mentioned him being in the St. Patrick's Day
John
parade.
Daley.
He was in the parade. I met him once down at the county building, John Daley.
Well, he was or still is pushing tax winkle, because he'll move up to the presidency at the Cook County Board if she wins.
Well, that's interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
She cannot keep both offices at president.
No, God,
no, that would not.
Not even in Illinois can you get not even in Illinois can you have.
In this day and age, maybe
can be
50
both
years ago they might have.
Both chairman of the Cook County Board and or mayor of the city of Chicago.
Wasn't Richard J. Daley that though?
He was chairman of the Cook County Democratic Central Committee.
Okay.
And mayor of the city of Chicago, which Preckwinkle is also chairman of the whatever remains of the. Being chairman of the Cook County Central Committee doesn't mean what it did in Daley's day,
right.
So, but she is, I believe, the chairman of the County Central Committee.
I have a question to ask, gentlemen. If Preckwinkle wins the office of mayor of Chicago, what happens to her job at Cook County?
That's we were just discussing that.
Oh.
But Tom was saying he believes that John Daley, the Cook County Commissioner, would be in line to step into that position.
Do they have to vote on that, or would that be automatic?
Well, they would the commissioners because it's between elections. The commissioners would just choose one of their members to serve as president.
They just do it among themselves.
Yeah.
I see. Okay. Thank you.
They would fill the vacancy of that office because they were just elected. They were just elected in
Right.
2018. So that's got quite a few. It's got a long time to go on that term.
Just one little sidelight in this morning's paper. There was a little article about Preckwinkle's son causing some problems in a condo that his mother owns. Now, we've heard about Lori Lightfoot's sexual orientation, all of this. We don't know, does Tony have a husband still living? We don't know about her marital status, other than the son who apparently is causing trouble.
As far as I know, yeah.
It'd be interesting.
And that son was married.
Let's talk about
thing,
he and his wife have had issues, right, disturbing the other residents of the condo.
And Lori Lightfoot, I don't know if it's an official marriage to her.
They've adopted a child.
Her partner.
Yeah.
But we do have,
How
Lori and I do have that in common. We both like white women. So we've got something in
Her
common.
partner's a white
something
woman.
in
I
common.
wasn't certain
Yeah,
of that.
right,
But that
yeah.
sounds right.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Caucasian
this.
American.
There you go.
So that election's coming up in April. That's
Second, I believe,
April
is
2nd is
Right.
the actual the
Week
runoff.
from Tuesday?
Ear-
Coming
early,
up fast.
early voting started today.
The Republican Party is obviously not a very significant factor in electing the mayor of the city of Chicago.
Well, I think they did away
Usually
with that.
nonpartisan
It's
now.
nonpartisan now.
yeah, it's
so
not.
that-
But I mean, as a party, I don't know. Was there even a? I don't know. Was there even a Republican candidate amongst all? I don't think there was even a Republican
I
running.
don't think that anyone
amongst the
anyone
3 dozen.
declared. I don't think anyone
What
declared
was
as
the
a
last one?
Republican.
Well, they went to this nonpartisan format some years ago. But
I think Richard
there
Jay
used to
always
be.
ran against so-called Republicans, but more
Daley
recently, I
always
don't know.
ran
Yeah.
against John Wayner and Ben Adamowski
Right.
and Bob
Yeah.
Merriam
That's
and
right.
Richard Friedman. I think
sounds
was
He
the
ran into a
Republican. He was
bunch of them,
71. I think he was the nominee in
We had
71.
4 elections, or maybe 5.
67 was Wayner. 63 was Adamowski. No, 59. Oh, 59 was Tim Sheehan. Tim
The
Sheehan
name sounds
was
familiar.
a well-known. He was a well-known Republican politico. Tim Sheehan was the Republican in 59. Adamowski in 63. Wayner in 67. Friedman in 71. And by the time they got to 75, whatever was left of the Republican Party was almost non-existent. I think there was a Republican nominee. I don't even remember the name of the nominee.
Lara
that-
America First Day.
it probably was a less well-known figure than Lara America First Day.
I think Adamowski got more votes than any of his
Yes,
other.
he was the most successful.
But still not
Benjamin,
that
right.
close.
No,
It was not that
no.
close of an
Well,
election.
that
no.
Lar American First Daily, he ran, 20 times or something like that?
Oh, he ran for everything. He ran for
Right.
president of the United States, and
Right.
he supposedly was on Jack Parr's show once. He says, "My first point, my second point, my third point," and somebody in the audience shouted out, "Hey, Lar, take off your top hat and we'll find another point."
What was his issue, I wonder, at the local level? Our American First Daily.
He was just a chronic.
Wannabe
publicity
or would-be
figure,
or
ran
something
for
like
He
office.
got the publicity, sure.
Like Harold Stassen. Remember Harold Stassen was a Republican.
there's a guy.
Harold Stassen was a fairly credible Republican candidate in the 40s. He was governor of, I'm going to say
Yeah, I think-
Wisconsin or maybe Minnesota.
I think
I'm not
it
sure.
was Minnesota.
He ran for governor a lot,
He was
though.
actually, he was a credible figure in 1948.
He was like a boy wonder of that
Yeah, he was
year.
called a
That's
boy
right.
wonder,
Yeah,
and he
yeah.
was one of the many possible Republican nominees in '48 when Dewey got the nomination. But after that, he just became a joke, and then he would every 4 years he would announce for president in the Republican, Harold Stassen, and he just became a national joke the way Lar America First Daily was. Not sure if it was V. He had a middle initial, but. He was balding, and when he ran in like '68, he had this toupee. That was the big news of Stassen's campaign. Was
He
he had
had
this,
on his mind.
rug that changed his appearance, completely changed the way everyone remembered good old Harold Stassen.
He's going to be like this Bernie.
Well, they claim a lot of these perennial candidates. If you run for office and you set up a funding account, all that money, that's yours. All you have to do is pay taxes on it. So if you lose the election and you got a couple $1,000s in your account,
I'm not sure if you can do that. That was true. I'm not sure if it.
Very good
And again, it
question.
maybe it varied from state to state.
Yeah.
There were times when you could do that. You could, but I'm not sure if that still is in Illinois. I don't know if that's still the law in Illinois that you can convert it and just pay the income tax on it.
But in Illinois, that wouldn't make that much difference anyway.
Well, the great sovereign state of Illinois, our unique approach to politics. They have a 2-term limitation for governor, 1 term in the state house, and 1 term in the big house.
Yeah, and they've been in office for 40 years.
Although on a
Yeah.
couple of occasions, those crimes that got them into the big house were committed after they were.
Yeah.
Yeah, Dan Walker
mitigated
was
that
It is
first,
amazing
yeah.
how many Illinois governors.
yeah,
I mean,
two
it
guys
is
two guys
embarrassing.
in the food line in prison, and the one guy says, "Man, this food is terrible," and the other guy says, "Yeah, it was much better when you were governor."
You were governor. Oh, God. Well, if we've kind of run out of mayoral stories, I suppose we could shift. We got about 45 minutes. We're at the midpoint of this half hour. We said mayors, presidents, and St. Patrick. We've done 2 of the bullet points on our agenda. Presidents of the United States, President's Day, Washington, Lincoln, Reagan. Anybody have any observations on the highest office on earth?
We talked earlier about when they designated, and again, I don't agree with it either, but when they designated it as President's Day, now does that include all the presidents?
Well, that's the problem.
Yeah, that's the problem.
My understanding is that when they had this Uniform Monday Holidays Act around 1971, which is when they moved a number of holidays from their traditional date to Monday. Among those that were moved at that time were Armistice Day or Veterans Day. And so for some years, Veterans Day was celebrated on I think it was the last Monday of October. And the veterans organizations, to their credit, rebelled against this, complained and complained and complained, and finally their efforts were rewarded, and they shifted Armistice Day back to November the 11th, which had meaning because it was the day that the First World War came to an end. They changed Washington's birthday to I guess it's the 3rd Monday in February, but I believe that officially it remained Washington's birthday. It's just that all the stores and businesses and everybody else decided to call it President's Day. And now all it means is that they have their sales. They have their they have cartoons on. They have guys dressed up as Washington and Lincoln selling toothpaste or automobiles or whatever. And it's totally divorced the fact that Washington was a truly, truly great man who should be honored with his own birthday.
That's right.
And that's why our capital is named after him, and a state is named after him, and he was first in war, first in peace, first in the hearts of his countrymen. He should be honored as George Washington, and not President's Day.
As well as Lincoln.
And Lincoln also.
Yeah. Speaking of Lincoln, there was a guy in Chicago. Remember a guy who was dressed up as Abraham Lincoln with a big top hat and carried a duck under his arm?
I forgot the duck.
Yeah, I remember that.
You remember that guy? He used to work. He used to walk around downtown.
Yeah.
Did he ever explain what significance
No,
the duck
I don't think he ever talked to
I think
anybody.
the duck said that he won him in a raffle.
He was a quack.
Oh, jeez.
Well, getting to this point right now, and we're talking about the presidents and so forth. What's your feelings on this Obama library and BS out in?
Kind of ties mayors and presidents.
Yeah, well, it's it's our money that's being used for this. Just like this Paywar, my old 47th Ward alderman wants to give $1,000 to 1,000 people automatically, and see if that doesn't bring them their status in the world up. And you know what? That just sucks as far as I'm concerned. And so does this Obama's thing. Now, I don't live out south there,
where is
but
it supposed to go on the lakefront, or is it? I don't know.
Right down the street from
Jackson Park.
Museum of Science and Industry.
Yeah, in
by
Jackson
the
Park.
Museum of Science
Just a
and
little bit south of there.
South of there.
Washington Park area.
Okay.
My only thing it would
The
be
western edge
completely
of
out of character with the rest of the area. If you wanted to build buildings, say in character,
So it's going to be a modernistic
like
steel and glass.
15-story building, and
That's one
what,
proposed.
100 acres or something like that.
100
And he's
acres?
what's
No,
that
it's
one
not- it's
street
not
he's
that
gonna
big,
get rid of?
What's it, the Obama land?
The parks
Maybe
people,
10
theme
acres.
park? Or,
they're taking park land for
Yeah.
it.
that's the
Right.
problem, because
That is the
there are
problem.
laws which
Right.
prohibit that.
Yeah.
Right. And he says it'll be all, there won't be any city involved. But if they're going to take parkland and streets, there's all infrastructure under the ground,
Sure.
and they're not going to pay for that. The city's going to pay for that. The residents of Chicago will be paying.
And there's some issue, is it going to be a presidential museum or just a library?
I think it's both, because I think most of them are
I
both.
don't think you've decided on that yet.
The rule now is you put up not just a library, but a museum. Every
Right.
president, it's
Yeah.
now a complex where you have you have your papers and documents, but there's also a museum. And every president every one of them now, they have a reproduction of the Oval Office. I mean, there are
Right.
Oval Offices sprouting all over because every presidential museum wants to have a
Right.
reproduction of the Oval Office
Right.
with his desk and the flags and everything that he had. So, I mean, our country is going to have a surfeit of Oval Offices. You know,
Right.
with
But the one in
every
Washington, or in Lincoln's, that was fairly recent, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah. Well, obviously, when Abraham...
No, but I mean, like within the last 20 years.
I think the first president where they really had was FDR, was at Hyde Park.
Right.
That he would have his papers and documents
Right.
deposited there. And then Harry Truman was the first president to actually build a library.
Right.
With FDR was his home, so they turned
Right.
his home into a... And the homes and birthplaces of many presidents are
Oh,
museums.
Reagan has got a beautiful place down there, and of course
that's
they're
where he-
buried there
no,
too.
California.
But
Yeah.
he was
Yeah.
born in Illinois somewhere.
Yes, he was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Born
Yeah,
in
Tampico. or-
Tampico and
Yeah.
lived in Dixon.
yeah.
So there
Well,
are two
that's another bone of contention about the Obama library,
doesn't
is
live here
because
anymore.
his connection to Chicago is very limited.
Yeah.
I mean, why here?
Right, strong but limited.
They
You're
talk
right. You're
about
right.
the
Hawaii.
building in Hawaii,
Yeah.
and if the location is correct, that's not going to draw a lot of people. They'll get the school groups, just like DuSable Museum
Right.
does.
Nobody's arguing anymore that Obama was born in Kenya or something like that. We've gone through that issue.
Is there any pushback to this? I mean, there have been
Yeah.
think
there's
some.
some opposition to
Oh,
building
yeah.
it.
Oh,
There's
yeah.
Friends of the
yeah.
Park.
Save the Park people and
Yeah,
the
yeah.
park organizations.
And the residents are saying the first thing it's going to do is kick up rents.
The residents aren't wild about it either.
No, that's what I mean. They're the ones who are
And
making the big stink about it.
and who's going to be working, building it? They want a certain percentage of locals hired.
Residents. Yeah.
Unfortunately, they have to have some. If you're in that level of construction, you have to have some skill level that
Right.
That's an issue.
they are obviously overlooking.
If that's a situation, then you can figure maybe 7, 8 years, it'll just fall down, crumble.
That's not good.
But that neighborhood isn't
Kinda
a
like
slum
the
either. It's a
administration.
pretty high. But then
Yeah.
again, you
Well,
get
it-
across.
it-
Was it
yeah.
King Drive, and it's like
Right.
a ghetto.
Is this something that's going to happen, whether anyone likes it or not? I mean, has the boat already sailed on this? Or
Well, I guess the
Seems to
Park
have.
District already voted to allocate the land, so
Yeah.
so it's
That's done.
it's an
But
Yeah.
these
China,
these
yeah.
parks people are very tough too. They're very they got a lot of clout.
Who was it that started all the parks in the city? Said they couldn't be used for. Well, I guess that's not a commercial purpose, but.
Was
We
it
had the
Burnham?
Burnham plan.
Yeah.
And there's somebody came up with a thing where just east of Michigan Avenue, where they had railroad tracks and railroad yards. They want to build stuff there, but they say
Well, only the Art Institute. At
The-
Grand
the
Park.
no,
Art-
it's
right,
behind
right.
the Art Institute. And who was the guy that Montgomery Ward, was he the one who sued
He had a
him
long-lived
and
land.
said he didn't want to
suit,
have any
yeah.
commercial property? It was supposed
he was.
to be.
I think he was
There's
instrumental.
more
it was
recent
supposed to be
motoring.
for
The lakefront.
Lakefront,
Seeing to it
right.
the
Keep it
lakefront.
free and
this
clear.
this
Yeah.
violates it so
Yeah.
far, but there's
Yeah.
money involved in it, so
Well, the rule
was-
always is that no Republican is above the law. So it obviously doesn't apply to to Barack Obama.
well, yeah.
Mm.
Doesn't
We hear
apply
that
to
all the
any
time.
politicians
No Republican
in
is above
Illinois
the law.
or in Chicago.
I come up with some Jeopardy type questions for my senior group, and I've got kind of an interesting one regarding American presidents.
Okay.
All presidents, with one exception, from U.S. Grant
Right.
to William Howard Taft,
Right.
had facial hair. Who was the one president between about 1869 and 1915, roughly, before Woodrow Wilson became president? Who was the one exception to the presidents who otherwise have all had facial hair?
William McKinley.
Good. Brilliant.
Billy
William
Billy
McKinley.
M.
William McKinley didn't have a mustache,
They'd
didn't
like
have a
that.
beard, didn't
Yeah.
have mutton
But
chops.
his successor, and
Teddy did, yeah.
And
Teddy.
along with him, now I'm quite sure, I got to verify this, he was also the last Civil War veteran who was president.
Unless you count Woodrow Wilson, who as a boy worked
Something.
in a gunpowder factory in Virginia. He was working it. He was.
Well, that's interesting. That you-
Wilson was arguably the only Confederate veteran to serve as president of the United States. Never, he wasn't a soldier,
Sure.
but as a boy, he worked in a gunpowder factory in the South. I think in Virginia.
Oh.
I believe in Virginia.
That was his home state. Yeah.
Might have been
Yeah.
Georgia, but because he moved, he spent some time in Georgia and in Virginia. But he did work in a gun. But I mean, you're true. McKinley was the last true Civil War
Right.
veteran
The
to
can-
serve,
Whether
serve
he
as
was an
president.
officer, I don't know.
Serve as
He
president of
might
the
have
United
been.
States.
Who was the Baby Ruth candy bar named after?
Yep.
Grover Cleveland.
okay.
Grover
Right,
Cleveland's
Baby Ruth.
daughter.
Okay.
Baby Grover Cleveland was a bachelor throughout his entire adult life, and he married Frances Folsom,
That's right. In the White House.
who was a strikingly attractive girl and many years younger than Grover Cleveland, and they had a child, Ruth, and it was from that the baby, everybody was hearing about Baby Ruth Cleveland, and that's where the candy bar. It has nothing to do with George Herman
I
Ruth.
wonder if they named the prison after her, Folsom.
Folsom, right. Maybe she lived there.
I'm going. I hear the train at Folsom Prison.
And Cleveland later in life had a terrible bout with cancer.
Yeah, his jaw.
The
While he was
jaw.
president, his second term.
Yeah.
Okay.
Grover Cleveland, of course, the only president to serve 2 terms that weren't consecutive. He's president, he's out of office for a term, and he's president
22nd
again.
and 24th,
What
I think.
president had a real bad stroke and
Woodrow Wilson.
supposedly his wife was
Wilson.
running the
That's-
government for quite a while?
Yes,
Wilson
this
was
is pretty
essentially
well
an
documented.
invalid.
Yeah,
His wife, she wasn't running a government, but she was controlling who got to see him and who didn't get to
Right.
see him, and what papers he would sign, and what.
Right.
So she was, they've called her. She wasn't really the first woman president, but no one realized how much control she had at that time because
Now, was
Wilson
that-
never fully recovered.
how-
Is that
fully
where
recovered.
the
from the stroke.
25th Amendment came from?
Oh no! 25th Amendment came in the 1960s.
Oh, that was Kennedy.
It was after Kennedy's
Right, okay.
assassination. Essentially, because they realized that if the president, it was the problem because when Kennedy was assassinated, Lyndon Johnson became president. The next in line under the law, because the Constitution doesn't go beyond vice president. All the Constitution says is that if the president dies, the vice
Speaker of the
president shall
House
become
was the
president.
third.
Well, what I'm driving at is that if the president died or was assassinated and the vice president became president, the vice presidency in those days was vacant.
Oh, okay.
There was no vice president. And so Congress then would establish who would be next in line. And at that time, it was the Speaker of the House and the President pro tem of the Senate. The Speaker of the House at that time was John W. McCormick of Massachusetts,
Okay.
and he was like 76 years old. Now today we've got a president in his 70s. Doesn't mean anything. But in those days, being 76 years old caused a lot of people to say, hey, can you really be president when you're past? And the Speaker of the House was Carl Hayden, senator from Arizona. And Carl Hayden had represented Arizona ever since it became a state in 1912. So that gives you an idea how old Carl Hayden was in 1963. He was about 90 at the time.
Wow.
And he continued serving in the Senate until he was in his 90s. And people looked at these 2 guys that obviously had seen quite a few summers in their lifetime, and they thought, these 2 guys are next in line? And this is the height of the Cold War.
Right.
So that caused everybody to say, we've got to have a better system than this.
Right.
So they came up with the 25th Amendment, which now provides if the president dies and the vice president succeeds, now you can fill the vice presidency,
Right.
which is how good old Jerry Ford,
He was the only one never elected
never
to the
elected,
presidency.
never elected. Only elected by the voters of his district in Michigan,
Right.
Grand Rapids, Michigan. So that, and then Ford in turn picked Nelson Rockefeller to be vice president. So we had 2 appointed vice presidents,
And then you had a Ford and a Rockefeller,
Ford and Rockefeller.
both
That's
in the
right.
office.
That's right. And Rocky Nelson Feller. And some people think that if he had left Rocky on the ticket in '76, he would have won the election. Because they would have probably carried New York, and that would have been enough to have
If he won the
avoided Jimmy Carter
pardon-
becoming president of the United States.
Pardon.
Well, no, but I'm just saying, I'm just
Right.
tying in with this.
Right.
He dumped Rockefeller because Rockefeller was unpopular in the party. There are those who think that if he'd left Rockefeller on the ticket, he would have won the election because Rocky was still enormously popular in New York, and he probably would have carried New York State. So anyway,
Every time I hear Rockefeller's name, I remember he gave a speech, and this in the old days when William F. Buckley was one of the few conservative voices out there. And Rockefeller's speech was, "We must cut the spending. We must cut this. We must cut." He kept on saying, "We must cut this," and William Buckley Jr.'s response was, "We must cut the crap."
Rocky was famous. He once said, this was in like 1958, I think. He said, you take the average American, the average working man, a guy that's only making, say, $100,000 a year. He obviously was just kind of out of touch as to what the average working man.
Pardon me, gentlemen, it's time for yet another intermission. You're listening to Meet the Chicago Historians, and we'll be right back.
Do you need new tires for your vehicle? How are the brakes? Are they in good condition? How's your front wheel alignment? Do you need your tires rotated? How are the shocks and struts? Do you need an oil and grease change? How about a tune-up? When was the last time you had your engine tuned up? How about the wiper blades? Are they nice, sharp blades to clean off the rain and snow? How are the headlights, tail lights, stop lights, turn directional signals? Are all the bulbs working? How's your cooling system and the exhaust system? How about your battery? Does that need to be upgraded? How about the belts and hoses, fuel injectors, timing belt and chain, and the air conditioning? Is that all working properly? Well, if you need any maintenance work done on your vehicle, go to Grand Tire and Auto Service, which is located at 7034 West Grand Avenue in Chicago. They are on Grand Avenue on the north side of the street, about 2 blocks east of Harlem Avenue. You can't miss the building. There's a big Goodyear sign right on top of the building. Or you can call area code 773-622-4361. Don, Chris, or Ken will be more than happy to assist you and to help you with any questions you might have about the maintenance on your vehicle. Their hours are Monday through Friday, 7:30 to 7 o'clock in the evening. Saturday, from 7:30 in the morning until 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and even on Sunday from 9:30 in the morning until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So once again, for any maintenance work you might need on your vehicle, go to Grand Tire and Auto Supply. Once again, their address is at 7034 West Grand Avenue in Chicago, about 2 blocks east of Harlem Avenue on the north side of the street. And their phone number is area code 773-622-4361. They have great service. Their mechanics are all certified mechanics, and they do quality work. Now, I've been going to Grand Tire with my vehicle since 1985, right up until this present day. So once again, Grand Tire and Auto Service at 7034 West Grand Avenue in Chicago. Their phone number is 773-622-4361. Don, Chris, and Ken will be more than happy to help you and to advise you on any maintenance work you might need on your vehicle. So once again, Grand Tire and Auto Service at 7034 Grand Avenue in Chicago, about 2 blocks east of Harlem Avenue on the north side of the street. You can't miss the building because there's a big Goodyear sign on the top of the building. That's Grand Tire and Auto Service, 7034 34 Grand Avenue in Chicago, and their phone number is area code 773-622-4361. For quality service, it's Grand Tire Auto Service, 7034 Grand Avenue in Chicago, 773-622-4361.
Once again, back to our discussion. John?
It's a shame you couldn't have heard. We had a great discussion while the commercial was on. We had just as good of a discussion while the commercial was on as we were talking about. we covered the horizon. We talked about the wigwam downtown and Abraham Lincoln and Seward and Steve Douglas, and question came up of stealing Lincoln's body. There was a rumor. As I understand the story, there was a rumor around the turn of the 20th century that Lincoln's body had been stolen. And as a result, there was so much controversy with this, they had to exhume Lincoln's body to verify that it was still there in the tomb in Springfield. And his son, Robert Todd, was still alive at that time, and he came and identified the body. And the story is that when they removed the lid, that Lincoln's body was perfect. He was clearly recognizable as Abraham Lincoln. They were shocked. Right. Because you hear stories about this, about saints, saints of the church whose bodies were never corrupted. Well, but they said that everybody was aghast, and people who remembered him and people who had never known him were just aghast. But they did that to verify that it was in fact the remains of Abraham Lincoln. Yeah, now when they reburied him, they put concrete so that there could never be that question raised again.
The reason he was so well preserved is he had resident undertakers on the train. In every few days, they were really. I guess they took
it was
because he was taken
close to
from
2 weeks after his death. He was on.
They took his body on this.
They had to redo
this grand tour of the northeast of the country, winding up in Chicago and then in Springfield.
Right.
And so they they verified. Robert Todd, of course. Robert Todd was in Washington, D.C. He was on Ulysses S. Grant's staff. I mean, he was the president's son. He was a young man. He had enlisted in the Army. He was on Grant's staff. He had come home. The Civil War was essentially over. Right. And he went back to the White House the night that Lincoln was assassinated. He was one of the people that Abraham Lincoln asked to join him at Ford's Theater, but he had declined because he was worn out. He'd been with the Army, and they had been in combat until very recently. So he went back, and he's present in Washington, D.C. when his father is assassinated. In the 1870s, he is in the railroad station with Rutherford B. Hayes. He's now an older man. He's a prominent figure in government, and he's with Rutherford B. Hayes when Rutherford B. Hayes is assassinated.
I think, John, you mean Garfield.
Excuse me, Garfield. I'm
Rutherford B. Hayes. I hate to correct you like that.
Hayes is Garfield succeeded. I'm sorry.
No.
He's in Washington D.C. when Garfield is assassinated, standing right there. He's there in the railroad station, and then in 1901, he's in Buffalo, New York. He's at the big exposition in Buffalo, New York, on the day that William McKinley is assassinated. So he was present at all three of the presidential assassinations. I always said if he had lived long enough, he almost certainly would have been in Dallas on November the 22nd, 1963. So,
and there was a rumor, and I don't know where he was, Illinois or something. He fell off a railroad track. Somebody pulled him off the track, and it was John Wilkes Booth's son or grandson or something.
I've never heard that story.
No,
that's interesting.
I heard something about that too. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. A little bit of presidential Robert Todd Lincoln, Lincoln's eldest son.
Another interesting piece of Chicago trivia. There's a piece of water that's right next to the Old North Pier Terminal, right off of Grand Avenue. It's called the Ogden Slip.
Ogden Slip, right?
Mm-hmm. And the officer that was in charge of the Corps of Engineers that built that was Jefferson Davis. And the attorney that negotiated the deal was Abraham Lincoln.
Interesting.
Springfield.
Interesting.
Yeah. Pickett, George Pickett, who led the famous Pickett's Charge in the Civil War, he was able to go to West Point through a congressional appointment that came from Abraham Lincoln. Pickett, who was a Virginian, was not able to be appointed by his congressman. His congressman had used up his quota of appointments to West Point. And apparently the congressman was a friend of Abraham Lincoln. It was during the 2 years that Lincoln only served 1 2-year term in the House of Representatives. But that was the 2 years that young Pickett wanted to go to West Point. And so the Democratic congressman from Virginia, went to Lincoln and asked if he might have an appointment that he had not used, and Lincoln did. And Lincoln gladly turned it over to this man so that George Pickett could go to West Point. And the result of that was that Pickett, who's an officer, a general in the South, in the Army fighting, would never permit anyone to say a word against Abraham Lincoln in his presence. He would explode if anyone said anything critical of Lincoln. He said, I owe my military career to Abraham Lincoln, and I will not forget that.
And you know what? He had all kinds of fences named after him, too.
Yes, he did, yeah. It's amazing. I mean, there's
most of them were painted white.
The number of picket fences that you can find. And, the thing, he got a commission out of that.
Right.
So, I mean, his military record, look at the money that he made.
Maybe that's why they made all the fences in Chicago.
Well, I left
not a picket.
This is true, then, the association with the name Picket and the fence.
You heard that slogan, didn't you? If it's not a picket, it's not a fence.
Right. Lincoln, all of Lincoln's in-laws during the Civil War were Confederates because his wife come from Kentucky, and all the ones on her side.
I thought some of her family was divided between.
No, they were all.
You're sure about
and
that?
I understand some of her in-laws actually came to the White House on holidays.
Yeah. Her southern in-laws, yeah.
Right, but they were all Confederates,
which caused some consternation, but. Abraham Lincoln had realized that he had an interesting marriage with Mary Todd Lincoln, and she at times caused him all kinds of political difficulties. She spent too much money at a time when the government was at war, but he always kind of tolerated the problems that he never really remonstrated with her. And when she brought her Southern relatives, there were some eyebrows raised about that.
And I understand when they signed the Articles of Surrender, Lincoln had the first song or something was played was Dixie.
Yeah, they came to the White House.
He always liked Dixie.
Crowd came to the White House and they were cheering and celebrating. They asked him what song he wanted to hear. He says, "There's a song I've always liked, and I think we can now claim it as property of war, as something we've taken over as property we've confiscated from the war." He asked them to play Dixie. So they played Dixie. They played Dixie in front of the White House on the day that Lee surrendered to Grant.
How different our history might have been if Lincoln had lived another 4 or 8 years. Even if he was out of office, you wouldn't have had the ineptness, at least, of Andrew Johnson.
But you don't know. He would have.
You just don't know.
He would have faced the same difficulties that Johnson did.
Perhaps,
the war would have been over. He would have no longer been. He would have come down to earth. He wouldn't have been a wartime commander-in-chief anymore. So you don't know. And if he wasn't part of the Lincoln legend is the fact that he was assassinated. The fact that he dies on Good Friday.
Because they were talking about impeaching him too, weren't they?
Well, not
the same thing with
Kennedy.
Kennedy's. I mean, that's his.
If Kennedy had not been assassinated, he wouldn't loom as large in our history as he did.
Probably would never have got those civil rights bills through Congress.
Well, what's his name was the one who signed them?
Johnson. Lyndon Baines Johnson.
What's his name did too after him? He ran against Kennedy the first time and lost.
Nixon. Richard Nixon. Yeah. But I know what you're saying. That people think if Lincoln had lived, how much more good, and he very well may have. But you just don't know. You don't know what because politics would have gone back to normal. I mean, once again, it would have been wrangling and squabbling, Republicans and Democrats, and there was a lot of Lincoln wanted to be lenient. He wanted a relatively lenient policies toward the South, and the fire eaters wanted to punish the South.
Right.
And
Yeah.
Lincoln would have been right in the middle of all of that. So he
LBJ
might have made it work.
LBJ, that was another classic example. We're talking about the Civil Rights Bill, something that he was totally against and fought against it, but then once it was passed, he took full credit
Right.
for it. It was just like when Bill Clinton in the welfare reform, it was fought it, it passed, it was popular, and hey, welfare reform.
Yeah, well, Lyndon, I mean, his voting record he was a conventional Southern senator during the 50s. He voted
from Texas.
Yeah. So
Were you ever at Ford's Theater
yes.
Oh, I have been.
to
yeah.
go through there and that?
Yeah.
And it kind of gets you.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
that's
yeah,
weird.
yeah.
If you ever been into Henry Ford Museum,
Yeah.
they got the chair that he was how they got that, I don't know. That he was assassinated in.
The chair. Well, see, they didn't.
It's
some of
still
those
got the
things were
blood.
dispersed.
Even
They
kept the
didn't,
Ford
they didn't-
Theater.
they didn't immediately think of turning it into a shrine. and
Right.
I think Chicago Historical Society had the bed that
The
Lincoln
bed,
died.
and yeah, it's still there.
right.
Yeah, the bed that
Yeah,
bed
my-
in which Lincoln
My
died.
mom was,
Yeah.
she volunteered there.
So they have.
They had weird things. Like Henry Ford got Thomas Edison to blow in one of those little vials, and supposedly he's got his last breath. I'll figure that one
I
out.
believe that. yeah.
Edison and Ford were good friends.
They were.
very good friends.
With Harvey Firestone.
Harvey
Harvey
Fire-
Firestone in
What was that? Remember that commercial? Henry sold a lot of cars because Harvey sold a lot of tires. Man, Jimmy Stewart did that ad.
Henry
missed
Ford
that
had
one.
his own tire company
Yeah.
though, and what's his name? George Washington Carver. He was one of their buddies too.
No kidding. Huh. Black guy.
They used to go out on camping trips all
And
over.
Herbert Hoover, when he was president, I think, used to go with them. There are these
Herbert
pictures
Hoover.
of
Herbert
Ford, Edison, and Hoover together, and Harvey Firestone,
Firestone, right.
and out camping. They're out in the roughing it, out in the
Right.
roasting hot dogs in the fire.
Right. And remember a few years ago they had that big stink about all those Firestone tires coming apart that
defects
were
out,
on
yeah.
Explorers.
Yeah.
And there was a big stink because there's a lot of Fords and Firestones intermarried with each other. And that's
That's
how
interesting.
come Firestone got sold to Bridgestone.
Is that a story?
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Bridgestone tires.
Right, but a lot of Ford and Firestone, back in the time it started when Henry Ford I was in, probably up until Henry Ford II.
Henry Ford,
Edsel.
yeah.
No,
Edsel
something else.
was Henry Ford's son.
Edsel,
Right.
Edsel Ford. Edsel Bennett Ford. Yeah.
Then
Yeah.
Henry Ford II
No,
was the
Brian
son of
Ford.
Edsel, I believe.
Yeah, he was the grandson of
That's
Henry.
right.
Henry
That's
II
right.
was the
That's right.
grandson of Henry.
Edsel, the first Edsel was his
Edsel
middle name
Bryant,
was Bryant.
excuse me,
That
Edsel
was Henry
Bryant.
Ford's
Edsel Bryant Ford.
wife's maiden name.
Bryant.
That's
Yeah,
interesting.
Sarah
Bryant.
Bryant.
Bryant was Henry Ford's wife's maiden name.
Right.
So then Edsel was Edsel Bryant Ford.
Sure.
Harry Bennett was his Ford's right hand man.
The first thing
tough
Henry
guy
Ford did
Yeah,
was he had
Edsel Bryant Ford.
he had one of his bodyguards who was an ex FBI agent, and the first thing they did was he had him throw him out, and they got to the point where they were pointing guns at each other.
Really?
Well, Harry Bennett had made life uncomfortable for Edsel. He
That's
was,
right.
Because there was a strange relationship. And when Edsel died very young, Edsel died during World War II, I think in 1943.
Right. They brought in Henry
They
Ford.
brought
II.
he took it. He was in the Navy, and they
Right.
got the president of the United States discharged him from the Navy,
Right.
so that he could run the Ford Motor Company, because the Ford Motor Company was a sole proprietorship. I mean, Henry Ford
Right.
owned
Owned
the
it.
Ford
Oh,
Motor
yeah.
Company, lock,
Yeah.
stock, and barrel. There was some stock amongst the family, I have
Right.
some but essentially Henry Ford owned the Ford Motor Company. The way another person might own a hot dog stand.
That's
or
right.
or a
And it wasn't.
So
going
they had to have
public
a
until
Ford.
56.
They had to have a Ford run the company.
Right.
And when Henry II got back to Dearborn, one of his first official acts was to fire Harry Bennett because
Harry
of what he had
Bennett,
done
right.
to his father,
Right.
the way he had treated his father,
But-
and he was going to get his revenge on
The
him. for
family
that.
still has controlling interests of the company.
They have what they call
51
Class B stock. Yeah,
Yeah,
Class B stock.
51%.
But yeah, they say that Henry Ford II, when there would be an argument in the board of directors, and he was the chairman of the board,
Says that's my name on the
he would point out the window.
Whose
You
name
could
is
see the
out
big
there?
sign. He'd say, "Whose name is that
Right.
out there on
No.
the building?" That was the way he ended
That's right.
arguments
That's-
about
that's it.
whether it was going to be his way or the way the board wanted.
Was that based on Ford's signature, the emblem Ford that we know
No,
so
what
well?
that
I
was
don't
based
know. I
on
don't know.
when the first cars they made was in 2003. Believe it or not, it was called a Model A1, A2, or A1, A something like that. And there was a guy, I can't remember the engineer's name. He says, we need a logo. So he went to the dime store and got a sign-making kit.
Oh, that's a story.
That's how
Put
they
it
came up with
together.
the famous Ford.
That's how the first
Ford,
script.
the Ford, that script logo.
And if you look at their commercials,
Clearly written Ford.
they're not getting rid of the blue oval, but they're going back to the old Ford script.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
They used to use the slogan Ford, family of fine cars.
Yes,
Play on the family.
And
of
that came in the
Ford
50s.
family of fine cars.
because at first
Yeah.
they had like a crest with
Yeah,
three
like a coat of arms,
with
yeah,
three
in three colors.
color. Yeah, and
Yeah,
that was
in the 50s,
that was
yeah.
Henry Ford's the second because
Yeah.
he wasn't a real good friend. He kind of blamed his grandfather,
For the way his father was.
for his father treating him. And what
Yeah.
Etzel did, he had a stomach ulcer.
Yeah,
he used
he was
to
ailing for
he
a
used to
long while,
drink
if I remember
fresh
right.
milk
Milk.
that was unpasteurized, and they think they cause cancer, but they don't know.
Yeah.
That's fair.
Yeah, I've been. If you're ever up that way, the Henry Ford's home, which is called Fairlane, is a museum, and then you can go see Edsel's home in Grosse Pointe.
Grosse Pointe.
I can't. But his home is also a museum now. You can visit his.
That's right.
his home in
And
Grosse Pointe.
Henry Ford's the second. He was in a place called St. Clair Shores,
Hmm.
and now there's
There's still a Ford.
William Clay Ford.
William
the second,
Clay Ford is the.
and there's a Henry Ford the third,
yeah.
and he's a pretty
the
good
wings,
guy.
yeah.
He knows he's a hot rodder.
Edsel. There's an Edsel II. Never became the head of
Etzel
the
B.
company.
Ford.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was.
He was no. Edsel.
No, B. Ford. Bill Ford. That was William Clay.
He is the son of Henry II's brother. He's the son of
Yeah.
Henry II's
Oh.
brother.
Oh.
But his son, Henry II, they used to call him Henry II.
The Deuce.
His son, Edsel II, Edsel Bryant Ford
Right.
II, never became the head of the company.
No, but
there was
he ran
friction
a couple
between.
of company
yeah.
in Europe or something.
Yeah, he had jobs with the Ford. He's still on the
Right.
board of
And
directors.
Henry
but,
Ford the third is his
his son. Yeah.
Right.
Henry Ford III. So there at some point there may be Henry Ford III running the Ford Motor. In any event, that was a digression.
Close to
of
the president.
The
Well, we
Ford
digress.
Ford Motor Company digression, folks. So it's mayors, presidents, St. Patrick, and Henry Ford was
See,
the topic of our discussion today.
Right.
Any further thing? I mean, anything you, John, would like to say about presidents or mayors or St. Patty or anybody or anything else? Or?
I can't say that on the air.
Okay, well, anything you can say on the air that you'd like to wind up with. We've covered the gambit. We've done justice to each of the topics I think that we set out to discuss.
Where did the 2-year limit? I know it's law now, but for a long time it was just
2-term limit.
and people recognize it. I think
It
that
was
went
the
away
custom.
with Roosevelt.
George Washington retired after 2 terms.
Right, and
they wanted him to run again. He felt 2 terms was enough for any president, and
Right.
that he didn't want to perpetuate himself in office. And it's a good idea because he died not long after.
True.
He
Right.
would have died if he had served a 3rd term. He would have died in the middle of his 3rd term. He
Right.
died
Yeah.
in 1799, and after that, every president
kind of
abided. The
yeah.
sense was that Washington had served 2 terms. No president should serve more than 2 terms. FDR, of course, left off. His 2nd term would have ended in the middle of World War II.
Right.
And the feeling was, in the circumstances
yeah.
in the world,
Yeah.
that we needed an experienced leader at the helm, and FDR ran. And
Not
won a
that we
3rd
were
term.
in the war then, but
No.
Europe was at war.
And there was
Right.
certainly a
Yeah.
sense that there's a danger that we might be in the war.
True.
Right.
True.
And in any event, he was reelected, and then was reelected to a 4th term, and died about 2 months into his fourth term. He's inaugurated January the 20th, and he dies on April the 12th. He served like less than 3 months of his fourth term. In any event, the Republicans decided they were going to punish the Democrats for having broken the 2-term limitation. Republicans controlled both houses of Congress after the war, and they pushed through the 22nd Amendment, which provided that no president may serve more than 2 full terms in the White House.
Is it true that Roosevelt and Truman really didn't get along?
They didn't know
They
each other.
barely knew each other.
They barely knew each other.
Because
that's a big.
Wasn't
he
they didn't
didn't
get
really
along,
catch
just-
up after he got to be president. He didn't even know about the atomic bomb.
He had I think one meeting with the. Remember the vice president was a non-entity in those days. We think of the vice president as an important figure today.
Right.
Vice presidents were ciphers. They didn't count for anything in those days. There was an old joke about
Go
it. Someone said,
garage or something.
I had 2 sons. One of them went off to sea, and the other became vice president, and I never heard of either one again. So FDR had one meeting with Harry Truman after their election, and that was pretty much it. But in any event, they decided they would punish the Democrats for FDR's 4 terms. They pushed this amendment, and that meant that in 1960, Dwight Eisenhower couldn't run for re-election.
Right.
It meant that in 1988, Ronald Reagan couldn't run for re-election. So it's the old question: you just cut off your nose to spite your face. The next 2 presidents who could have run for a 3rd term and didn't were both Republicans. So it's just the way the things shake out.
And I heard in Ephesus, it was a rumor, but when the last election, Clinton's wife was running, and it's all speculation. They were talking about having him run as vice president.
I heard that being talked
And then, if she got elected, she would step down, and her husband.
I didn't hear that part.
I think the amendment covers that. You can't be vice president either, because then you'd be next in line to become president.
Oh, okay.
And since you can't become president again, you couldn't be vice president, because if she would die or resign, he constitutionally could not have become president because he'd served his 8 years.
So you couldn't serve 2
you can't
consecutive ones and
then run for vice president,
or run for and then run again. So that's got to be total or so many years, 10 years.
Sort of like Cleveland, if you could.
You can't serve more than 2 years. If a vice president serves more than 2 years of the term that he succeeded to, then he can only serve 1 more term.
But the way it is now, they can
maximum you can serve is 10 years.
As president is 2 terms or 10 years.
So, like if you became vice president, and there was 2 years and 1 day left to go on the president's term, the president's assassinated with 2 years and 1 day left to go, then you could run twice.
Right. Okay.
You could run and run again. But if it's 1 day less than 2 years, you're out. You could only run for 1 term. You couldn't run for another term.
Okay.
Wait a minute. I'm confused. You mean Hillary did not win the election?
Well, in the minds of some people.
Well, because on election day, the Sun-Times said she had a 90% chance of winning, so I just tuned it out.
Yeah.
Oh, you didn't fight? Yeah, no, she lost.
Oh,
she actually lost.
She lost.
Just like Dewey defeated Truman.
Trump, he won. Yeah.
No.
Yeah, no. I remember everybody said he didn't have a prayer. He was going to get clobbered, landslide.
That wasn't the next day. That was the day of the election.
That's amazing. And the New York Times, I thought they were never. I thought they were. Yeah, I didn't think they could be wrong. New York Times.
I was shocked. I didn't know. I fell asleep, right?
If you thought you were shocked, you should have seen the anchors that night. You should have seen the
they were
expressions
crying
on their faces that night.
But I was watching it, and he was.
Charlie Rose, I think his jaw hit the floor at one point.
Right.
Yeah, they were all
he was
tears.
leading by a little bit, right? And I fell asleep, Bush, or Trump. And I woke up about 11 o'clock, and I'm looking, everything is red. What the heck happened here?
It was amazing.
Yeah, they had all. I think those balloons and everything at Hillary. Remember they had the glass ceiling that was going to shatter that glass. I think it's still there.
All
that glass is still there.
All the experts, I remember. I remember the experts talking about how Donald Trump it would be absolutely impossible for him to win on the. I'm talking about in the convention on the first ballot.
Oh yeah.
He had a chart. He had and it was absolutely mathematically impossible that Donald Trump would win the nomination on the first ballot. Could not possibly happen. This is an expert.
Oh, yeah.
These people are still out there touting themselves as experts.
I'll go you one better
Trump
than
is
that.
getting back at it. Yeah, right.
On the Sunday before the election, I think it was on ABC, This Week ABC, with that celebrated impartial journalist George Stephanopoulos.
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah.
They were speculating for a couple of minutes on who Hillary Clinton was going to appoint to her cabinet.
Oh,
they
yeah,
were speculating,
right,
in the round table. They were talking about who would be the likely Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense. And then somebody said, well, maybe this is a little premature. Maybe we'll do this next week.
Hold off a while.
Hold this off for next week, folks.
But looking back, the media, or as what's her name used to call it, the lamestream media, they probably did a lot to get him elected. Because how much free airtime did they give him? And kind of mocked him, and
he's like they say, he's good copy.
I mean, that's what I mean. In their what do you call it? Their ratings, they went way up. As soon as he got elected, they started screwing around with him.
They thought he was a sure loser. So they said, what can it hurt? Yeah, we'll give this guy all his coverage. Well, we're coming up, folks.
That's right.
We've plumbed the depths of our topics, and we've talked about St. Patty's Day. We've talked about presidents. We've talked about mayors. We've talked even about Henry Ford, ladies and gentlemen.
Who ran for mayor or was going to run for mayor.
Congress actually condemned Henry Ford. I understand they condemned Henry Ford. This past resolution, they came out because I think they accused. I heard he was mentioned as being a racist. So
he did some anti-Semitic.
Congress, 60, 70 years after he died, they also came out on the Dreyfus affair in France. They took a position, and that happened in the 1890s.
Nothing like being timely.
Our Congress side. But anyway, we've talked about many. I want to thank our panel. Why don't we go around? Let's give our panel an opportunity to take a final curtain call. Would you like to just give us your name?
Don Peter.
Tom McKenna.
Bill Kugelman.
Rich Lang.
So I'm John Escachoco. We wish our best to Jack Ryan, our regular moderator, and we've enjoyed having you with us here today. We'll be back next month. Have a very blessed and happy Easter. Happy St. Patrick's Day. Happy St. Joseph's Day. And now our announcer for a final word.
Okay.
And we want to, as Jack always says, remember,
right,
folks, history is not just a book you leave on the shelf.
Well done. Thank you, John. Thank you, John. Recordings of previous Meet the Chicago Historians programs are available for your listening pleasure via the internet at www.windycityhometown.com. We want to pay a special thank you to the executive producer of Windy City Hometown Entertainment Network, John Seconda. On behalf of everyone associated with our Historians program, we thank you for listening. And we'll be seeing you and talking to you next month. This is your announcer, Rich Lang. So long until next time.
You have been listening to Meet the Chicago Historians from the John DeVita Broadcast Center on the Windy City Hometown Entertainment Network on Monday, March the 18th, the year 2019. This broadcast was produced and directed by John DeVita, and a special thanks to the executive producer of Windy City Hometown Entertainment Network, Mr. John Seconda. Until next time, friends, please be safe and thanks for listening.